Your parents were too busy. Your education let you down. People told you culture wasn't for you. But you're not stupid, and this stuff's really interesting. Join us for some drinking and thinking about the best of 5,000 years of human civilization. After all, it belongs to you.
To me?
Yes, even to you. Even to you, yeah. So, here we are. We're in your extremely hot shed. We're recording a podcast, the second of the day.
Podcast 6 was recorded moments ago.
We're hot off the press, and now we're rounding up the series with podcast 10.
Yeah, this is the season
finale.
Try not
to think through. This is the season finale. Yes, we've made it.
We've been building up to this.
And it's safe
this is the end of history.
It's the end of history. It's also the end of a very long, epic period of drinking. I think we can safely say, I never thought I'd say this, but is it actually time to put our booze away and have a serious talk about life, the universe, and everything?
I think the time has come now for us to truly reflect, as we reach the end of this first season, what is the meaning of life? What is its purpose?
Yeah.
What does it mean to have a good life? We've come a long way. We've learnt a lot.
We've learnt a lot.
We need to reflect on all the things that we've learned. I mean, most of us have come into this, having read many of these books, but not all of them. I think we've shared our favourites with each other. And I've changed as a person. I genuinely feel richer. How should I now live?
How should we live?
What's next?
What
until season 2?
And as Plato says, this is not a small question, right? This is quite a big one.
Yeah, arguably the question which man and woman should wrestle with all their lives.
Absolutely right.
And anyone who's not wrestling with it, are they truly alive?
Yeah, well, they're wasting their time. But what I will say is, though, Plato will say this, I'm sure Aristotle as well, we don't have to put the booze away, because the guys we're going to talk about today, great thinkers, but also great drinkers, and they saw no paradox about that, they saw no tension between the two. And indeed, one of Plato's most famous works of philosophy is set at a drinking party.
Yeah, absolutely. We took the name of that text and tried to set up a drinking club at university, which never really kicked off, but I believe we were going to call it the Symposium.
Yes, we know. I mean, I really want to... Rereading this has made me really want to revisit that and see if we could actually do a proper symposium, like absolutely ancient Greek style.
Yeah, because you sometimes get invited through work as like, oh, we're going to a symposium on not an
academic symposium.
Like how to improve our operational outputs. No, there are dancing girls and drinks at his symposium.
Yeah, and you were supposed to get absolutely ratted.
I think one of the things which comes out of the people we looked at today, the Greek era we've been now studying for quite a long time, is that there are, of course, people from this time period who are saying, it's all about hardcore asceticism, you need to deny yourself, but they're the fringes, and most people think they're idiots.
Yeah.
Like the Stoics.
Yeah, exactly. And the Greeks, I mean, that's
generally,
it's like, about the Greeks
if we're to live. Yeah, if we're going to live our lives well, clearly our lives involve eating, drinking, love-making, friendships. Like, they are the very things of life. The question is, can we think about this philosophically? So I think it's important to say before we start that when we're talking about doing philosophy, we're not talking about some sort of airy-fairy, refined, old philosophy is about being dull and almost like some sort of like denying the physical in favour of some entirely intellectual action. They were thinking intellectually about how to live physical,
real lives,
embodied real lives.
Yeah, this is not a dry academic subject.
No. This is genuine. Every single listener should be questioning, how do I live my best life? How do I be the best me?
And how to die as well. And they put their money where their mouths were. This was not a purely academic exercise.
One of the first things they notice is that all human beings who are alive also happen to die at some point.
Right.
And therefore, given that there's a huge variety in our experiences we have in life, there's one experience that we all suffer and share.
Well, two, because we're born as well.
We are reborn. We don't remember that.
Speak for yourself.
So many issues have been explained by you remembering.
Apparently, I tried to crawl back up.
Oh, Oedipus.
Anyway.
Time which sees all has found thee out.
Hopefully Mum is not listening.
Nanny.
Anyway, so we're thinking, we're drinking, and we are exploring the first and perhaps greatest works of philosophy ever written.
Well, not quite the first.
Not quite the first. There were pre-Socratics. We have only fragments of most of them.
Yes, it's worth saying that when you say pre-Socratic, Socrates is generally regarded as the sort of the first of the great philosophers. There were, as you say, a few
whose
people...
thought we know in extensive detail.
There are a few people before that, like Thales... and a number of people.
He's the guy who predicted the eclipse that happened during the battle between the Persians and the Lydians.
He thought everything was made out of water.
Yeah, there were various ones. Well, they thought it was all made of fire.
There's a major French military-industrial company to maritime equipment called Thales.
Yes, it's named after him. I think.
Yeah, named after him. So, anyway, but then you have Socrates, who he didn't write anything down. He's the sort of famous one. He's in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
Yes, of course. Shortcut.
Yeah, that's a great film. It's a great film. But he's the one who you think of as wandering around asking difficult questions. We only know his work from his student Plato.
Yes.
And Plato himself had a famous student, Aristotle. So that's when we talk about the pre-Socratics, then we sort of talk about the Socratics. So essentially those three, they're the big three, and then everyone else.
And then everyone else.
Everyone else, ever.
And people famously said that all of Western philosophy is footnotes to Aristotle.
Footnotes to Plato.
No, footnotes to Aristotle, and Aristotle was basically writing footnotes to Plato. You literally got this wrong.
I'm sorry.
Put time out and look that up.
Right,
what will you do? What will you do when I'm proved right about it? What are we going to put? We're going to put some money into
£1, one English pound, one British pound.
That is big stakes. I'm now thinking, no, I'll take that bet. I will take that bet.
You carry on talking, right? It's not very interesting for our listeners.
So I will describe the first of our Socratic dialogues. The first work we're going to talk about today, the Symposium. This is Plato writing about his teacher and his hero, Socrates, and he says, I heard this conversation, I was talking to so-and-so, and then...
Sorry, just stop there. Alfred North Whitehead, the safest general characterization of European philosophical tradition is it consists of series
I don't
of
care what
to Plato.
Alfred North...
That's the quotation.
Whitehead. No! Well, type in footnotes to Aristotle, and let's see what comes up.
Right, you carry on talking about the Symposium.
So, he basically, it's a story within a story, and this is an account of a party, a drinking party, from many years ago, where Socrates is there with some of his circle. And they have been boozing heavily, as have we, and they decide to, instead of getting in the flute girls, which seems to be what they would have normally done at this stage, they decide to stop and do some drinking games. They decide to stop and have a more contemplative conversation about love. And they're asking the question, what is love? And basically, the dialogue, which is a very short book, is just a series of speeches by each of the people at this party saying what they think about love. And they're different speeches in different styles according to the characters of the people involved.
There's no reference to the quotation at all. I think it's like... I hate to interrupt because it's a really good point you're making, but the end of this season had to end as it really was inevitable, where I was to now review £1. Footnotes to Plato, which I think is harsh because Aristotle, as we will see, I think it deserves to be said as more than footnotes to Plato, which is probably why you believe that it's just a quotation.
Yeah, maybe.
The point is that Plato's the biggie,
and
Aristotle's equally biggie.
Yeah.
You talk about dialogues a little bit. I was listening out the corner while I was just looking up how wrong you were.
Okay.
Which you were wrong, for the record.
Can someone please send me in £1? There's someone who feels sorry for me on this.
Do you want to explain what we mean by dialogue? It's exactly what we think.
It's what we think. So it is a conversation, and we talked before about how the Greeks.
But the books are. These are not necessarily conversations which really took place. They are a literary motif where it's really interesting. It's like a two-hander. It's like
or sometimes more. They're more, and
they're great. They're really gripping.
It's fantastic, and so
it's like a podcast, but in book form.
Exactly.
You can imagine such a thing.
We've read that's a very good insight. So this isn't some dry academic work of philosophy. This is a conversation between people, and they were real people. Now, the conversation itself is obviously stylized, and it wouldn't have been an exact thing, but there may well have been a
people don't speak as eloquently as we do.
No, not everyone. It's not as easy as it looks. So we get Aristophanes, who we've encountered in a previous podcast. He gives a kind of, because he's a great comic writer,
author of the Frogs
and
the Clouds.
And he gives, and interestingly, in the Clouds, he's taking the piss out of Socrates, but here he's been friendly with Socrates. He gives a speech, a funny speech about love, and he gets hiccups halfway through, and then there's a kind of all these philosophers saying, what's the best way of curing hiccups? I mean, the Greek, they're asking every single question, even the big ones like that. Correctly enough, they identify that the best way of curing hiccups is to gargle with water, drink water backwards. And that's so true. It always annoys me when people say, oh no, you've got to have a sudden surprise, or dangle upside down, or no, drink something backwards.
It's interesting
we've known that since Plato.
It's interesting how Greek, like we talked before about how we knew the circumference of the earth with a stick and a couple of slaves. It's interesting that what they considered to be knowledge, they didn't yet have this academic division of types of knowledge. The people who were interested in how life should be lived were also interested in how big the world was and how to cure hiccups.
Yes.
It was just the sort of
They're
natural
trying to solve
inquiry.
everything. Right.
And later they had, maybe we've learned so much we need to sort of subdivide that. But I think we lost a great amount.
Yes, by academic over-specialisation.
I think it's a chap called Anthony Wood in the early 17th 17th century who was considered to be the last human being who had read everything published, and was the last sort of generalist, beyond which it became impossible to be one.
Well, until this podcast, and all of our listeners will be able to, know about all of the great books.
We've not no episodes on quantum mechanics, or biochemistry. You see, but these chaps, these philosophers, were also scientists, and for a long time, science was known as natural philosophy. Yes, it wasn't considered to be a distinction between them. It's the attempt to apply reason to explain things. Those things could be the human condition. They could be how to cure hiccups. They could be the formation of the Earth. Yeah,
and you get all of it, and it's all mixed in together, and that's one of the things that makes it so exciting.
It's the sort of conversation in these dialogues which you just have when you get a really good party and everyone's settling down, and you just put the worlds to rights. So imagine if you've had meetings like that, and then someone, Plato, no less, has written them up, given a bit of a polish, and passed it down for prosperity. That is what we're talking about, and they're cracking.
And it's cracking, and it's a great dinner party too. So you've got all these interesting people there. You've got Socrates. We've also got Aristophanes, and later on we're going to have
that is a good party.
Alcibiades bursting, and that is a great party, isn't it?
I mean, we've talked a couple of times about who are our ideal party guests, but but this was a party in which Socrates and Aristophanes were actually both there.
Right.
I mean, this has really happened.
So I think that's a really interesting one, and I think that poses a very interesting question for us, doesn't it? Which is this a second Breakfast of Champions challenge that we need to take up? Which is not just can we find the best 100 books that everyone should read, but also can we work out what would be the ultimate fantasy dinner party, and who would we invite?
We've sort of alluded to this before, but not consistently. I think that's true. We'll have to agree on how many people are going to be. Yeah, I think the danger is always going to be a bit like this first season is going to be somewhat privileged. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm sure Boethius or something, we're going to enjoy his work when we get to it, but he doesn't zing in the same way. Right. Like, there's got a lot of period, do you want Jane Austen? I mean, yeah, maybe she was apparently quite a wit. Yeah. How would she have got on with Socrates? Yeah. Well, if time travel is prevented, I will destroy the causal nexus trying to get the answers to that.
Yeah, just to get that dinner party put together. Well, it's a good challenge. So, who else is in this dinner party? We've got Pausanias. Unfortunately, we don't have Euripides or Sophocles, and I think it is a bit of a shame that we don't have one of our great tragic playwrights in there. So we've got Pausanias, who was a tragic playwright, but his plays don't really survive. But he gives a sort of more tragic account of love than Aristophanes' funny account. We've got a doctor called Nichomachean. He gives a kind of medical account of love, and so on and so forth. And then you get to Socrates, and there's a bit of kind of competitiveness creeping in. And then Socrates basically blows them away with the best speech about love, and he kind of says, "No, you're all wrong. This is what I think about love." And then he says that there's a sort of higher form of love, and that you might start off by thinking about seeing someone attractive on the other side of the street, and but he moves from basically perving at people to appreciating beauty in itself, and then through that seeing the form of beauty, and then it kind of moves love onto a more mystical plane. So this is where you get the idea of Platonic love.
Well, yes. So it's worth saying here. I mean, whilst these words are spoken by Socrates in the text, Socrates doesn't write anything down. Socrates basically appears as a character
in the works of
Plato.
So how much is it him? How much is it Plato?
Yeah, so Socrates seems to be a separate character from Plato in his works, but it is not true that Socrates often resembles Platonic arguments.
Yes.
That, of course, would be expected of Plato was his student, but at the same time we don't know. So we're always dealing with a slightly fictionalised version of Socrates. Centrally is this idea, and we don't want to get too far into this. The central idea of Plato is, and how it contrasts with Aristotle, we're going to come on to, is that they take different opinions about answering one of the great old philosophical questions, which is the questions of what we sometimes call universals and particulars.
Right.
But I think essentially a very quick way of saying is, the easiest example I always remembered is when we look at like a table, we go, oh, that's a table. But what? And we
like this table here.
Like this table here, but all different types of tables come in all different types of shapes and sizes. We can sort of tell the difference between a table and a bench, albeit that actually if you were just to give a simple description of them...
Is this a table or a desk?
Well, yeah, so here is an interesting question. What Plato says, how do we recognise something as a table? It's because we see an object which clearly participates in the form of a table. There is some sort of ideal table, and when things on Earth essentially reflects that ideal version,
the cosmic table,
participate in tableness, cosmic tableness, then they are a table. Aristotle takes a different view. He says that we can infer what a sort of ideal table is only from the instances they exist. And so we'll come on to it, but nearly everyone modern takes the Aristotelian viewpoint. But a Platonic viewpoint is not as stupid as it sounds. And it
hang on. Is there a form for everything? I mean, is there a Platonic ideal bottom, for example?
Yeah, or a telephone table, or something like that. They become, which most of our listeners won't even know what they were, but we used to have little seats that we sat next to on the telephone when they didn't move. So when we hear it, it's actually such a difficult idea to explain because the Platonic answer to it just seems so obviously wrong, and we're clearly the students, the successors of Aristotle's answer to this. But actually, if you look at cutting-edge philosophy, if there is such a thing, Plato has a bit of a look at it again. There's an argument to say, a bench is a really good example. A bench is a long thing, flat surface with 4 legs, but we're able to tell the difference between a bench and a table. It's not just the use it's put to. There does seem to be some sort of concept of tableness which is not present to benches. Anyway, the central argument they're having, because it's all very complicated,
and we've had a few drinks, it's obvious.
Yeah, is to whether the attributes that objects have exist in any way beyond the attributes themselves. Right. Why is any of this relevant? Because I've probably lost everyone and they're switching off. Is when it comes to talking about love, Plato's always interested in, or Socrates in this case, representing Plato's views, is interested, is there an ideal form of love, and that human behaviour, human loves, are best when they are closest to approximate it? Because if you say no, then it seems to be, and take a different position, which is what we naturally want to do, because it seems to be love as anything you can do whatever, like you can love anyone
of a man and a goat, whatever.
So it is actually quite important to have Plato's position. It is actually quite an important thing to stop us falling into complete relativism.
Right.
No one wants that. He might go too far, but basically he's saying, look, we can talk about loving right and loving wrong. Some people love unhealthily. For us to have the idea that something might be an unhealthy love, a bit stalkerish, that means we all have this idea that there is something which is right.
Tainted love.
And soft sell. Socrates' speech is in praise of this ideal form of love.
But the interesting thing is that you've described that very well, but
I'm not sure I have, because it's incredibly complicated.
It is complicated stuff, but and it's why they need to drink through. And just as we and cheers, by the way. But the idea of Platonic love has kind of become a shorthand for non-sexual love, right? It's kind of a romantic idea.
Very much was not that idea.
But actually, what in Socrates' conception, or at least in Plato's, the Platonic love wasn't that at all. Platonic love was the good old-fashioned love between sexual love between a man and a boy, underage boy. That is the original Platonic love.
Well, I think that's an example of Platonic love. Yeah, I think what he's saying is, isn't it? That
he even says common. We're not talking about common love of a man and a woman. We're talking about proper love, man and a boy.
Well, he means that there's a sense of this pure love, this almost heavenly is the wrong term because they didn't think of it in those sense, but this sort of philosophical, ideal, cosmic concept of love. This love which exists actually independently of whether anyone in the world ever actually loved. That's this idea. They think there's this world of forms, this world of ideas, this ideal love, which he thinks is often better approximated and reached in the good old-fashioned pederastic love that you might have for a slave boy, because it's truly noble. Whereas, when you fall in love with a woman and you marry her, that's normally for some sort of family reasons or, dynastic arrangements. It doesn't have that purity. But when man loves a boy, like Hadrian loved Antonius,
right.
And, which was just a sort of, a perfect love of this, perfectly normal love between a 54-year-old man, emperor, and a 15-year-old slave boy, who later committed suicide as a result of it. That reaches a purity.
Now we're talking philosophical. It's moving stuff, isn't it? It just shows you. I don't know what it does show you.
It's easy to joke, but I think we're getting to the point that they have this. They're interested in, or certainly Socrates and Plato are interested in, whether there is an ideal form of truth, beauty, justice, love, and what that looks like, and that sort of aping those or conforming ourselves or trying to realise in the real world those ideal forms,
a cosmic form,
is the way by which we live a good life. Yeah. We do it because we, how is one just in life? How does one administer justice? Well, one should discern the nature of justice and then try to apply it. How does one love perfectly? Well, let's just consider philosophically what true love is, and then consider what that would look like on earth. And that's why he's basically going, married life is the common. But if you want to not take out the slightly odd Greek cultural predilection for sleeping with slave boys, I suppose you could say we've all had those one true love that we burn the world down for, a passion, I think. Generally, though, in our society, we recognise we grew out of that when we were about 21. It wasn't a really good thing, that disastrous love affair we all had.
Interesting.
And then you have a sensible, mature thing which is deep and passionate, but has sort of reconciled to the realities of what they're going, you copped out, you sold out.
So this is different from both the kind of medieval chivalric ideal of love and the like post-19th century romantic love. That it's a slightly different thing, or is it? And we could argue about.
Well, chivalric love, I think, it has its roots in part in the Christian concept of agape, and a sort of selfless love, a love which is dutiful
and not involving fucking.
Yeah.
Whereas these,
they haven't got to that bit.
You could make the argument at least that that you could have some fucking here. Although interestingly, so the best bit is still to come in this story, which is that Alcibiades, who we've met before, he's the guy that broke all the willies off the statues in Athens and then accidentally fucked the Queen of Sparta and changed sides 3 times and changed history.
Was that Platonic love when he accidentally fucked the Queen of
Sparta? I definitely wasn't Platonic love. He bursts in at the end of this, basically in the middle of Socrates' speech, pissed out of his mind. He sounds like an excellent chap that we could have had on this podcast, basically. And he gives a slightly different account, and it's much more earthy, shall we say. And he basically says, I really love you. I really love Socrates, but I just can't get him to fuck me. Even though, look at me, I'm totally gorgeous.
Yeah, he's a bit old, though.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. And Socrates is like, no, I'm sticking to my platonic love. It's not going to happen.
It's yet another example, and we said this throughout the last, 10 episodes of everybody knowing each other. If you're, we should probably do some sort of like visual diagram timeline of people who appear in other things to indicate how.
Well, who slept with who?
Yeah, who slept with who? I mean, it sounds like Socrates would not sleep with it.
Did Socrates sleep with Plato?
Yeah.
Interesting question.
Well, if it does, it would have been a very Platonic form of love.
It would have been. But interestingly, Socrates in his speech...
That is a strange thought, isn't it? And not because we are... not because...
And did he give him a reach around?
well, not because,
History doesn't record.
In our enlightened times, obviously, homosexuality is rightly fully understood as just a perfectly sort of normal and natural part of life, but it doesn't have the cultural prevalence that it had before. I mean, it is weird to think that these famous people all basically...
all going down to the hard fucking.
Yeah. I mean, after a long day philosophising,
Did they philosophise and fuck at the same time?
I think there was a lot of it. Yeah.
You think so?
I think it was almost certain when you think about it. I suppose I never have thought of it before, but almost certainly Plato was sodomised by Socrates.
It's an interesting one. But, once he hit 16, he wasn't interested
anymore. What argument would you possibly have for that not happening?
He might have met him too late in his life.
Yeah, possibly.
I don't know. It's a very interesting. It's a fascinating one.
Plato and Aristotle,
right?
But not Aristotle and Alexander. Aristotle did not. Alexander the Great.
I think it would be quite a bold man to have done that.
I think a prince.
It's like I just paid you to do some tuition or a bit of rhetoric and a bit of grammar maybe, but what's going on here? And of course Aristotle himself famously says sex is a terrible context for thinking.
Yeah.
So
didn't get your post-nut clarity there.
Well, Alexander says that it's having sex that reminds him he's mortal.
Yeah.
So they're all quite fucked up about sex.
Yeah.
Who would have thought it? Are you fucked up about sex?
I don't think so, no.
I'm going to leave a pregnant pause there and we'll come back to that on another occasion. So it's interesting. Socrates also. This is all very blokey. It's all very homoerotic. But amazingly, there's this weird bit where Socrates says, "Well, I'm not. Basically, I know everything. Everything that I know about love was taught to me by a kind of love expert. This lady, a priestess, Diotima, and I'm going to tell you what she told me." And she's actually the person who's come up with this kind of
which I think is a good
love thing. Which
I think is a good rejoinder.
Did he shag her?
Well,
did she teach him everything he knew, physically as well as spiritually? And also, it reminds me of... So I had a geography teacher.
Did she teach you everything you should do?
And she...
Oxbow Lakes and Arts of Love.
Nanny taught me everything I know about love. She was that, in my mind, that role of Diotima. I'm assuming that Socrates and Diotima didn't get it on, but it would have been interesting if they had. But it would have been very interesting if I had. And I was wide in love with her. She was a very beautiful geography teacher. And everyone took geography, even though, let's face it, it's a shit subject, isn't it? Just so that they could have... And at the last day of school, we went to the pub after school. Very naughty, but we left school kind of thing.
Just you and the teacher?
Well, no. So I was there. All the people from school, boys and girls there, going down to the pub, and the teachers are there. And I plucked up the courage after a few drinks to go and have a chat with her.
So just for context, you're 18. How old is...
I was 17.
Okay.
She must have been in her mid-20s, I'd say.
Okay, alright.
So, but it would... Look,
not insanely.
The age gap between Socrates and Plato and Alcibiades, it's fine.
Yeah.
And I didn't really know what I was doing in those days, and I'm
not sure you've still done now.
Anyway, one thing as well, and actually I did have a conversation with her about gynecology, curiously.
What is it with you and bringing up gynecological subjects? Do you remember when you met my stepmother?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's an interesting lady.
Yeah.
Taught me everything I know about clitorises.
Absolutely the wrong topic to bring up, apropos of nothing.
Well, it's funny you say that because there's something quite similar.
Yeah.
And then moved to a different pub. But I moved to that pub as well, and I continued the conversation. And if only I'd had a Plato to record, it didn't end particularly well, this conversation, and I was basically suspended from school. But still, I think I was on the cusp of an intellectual, gynecological,
it was
romantic
stalky, but
breakthrough.
it was still Platonic, is what you're arguing.
Absolutely. And if Miss ever listens to this podcast, and I hope she does, get in touch, and we can continue that conversation.
So, I want to make 2 points.
Who taught you everything you know about love?
I want to make 2 points. Firstly, as you say, Platonic love is used generally to mean sort of a sexless idea, like it's held up as this idea where it's love which never crossed that bound.
Yeah.
I think because now we have the idea that that's a sort of selfless abnegation, and therefore that's a good thing. But so there's a similarity in the way that it was being used as a love which is not purely rooted in the mundane. But for them, it definitely was about romantic and sex elements. It was about the
exactly. So I think but isn't this the fascinating difference and why the Greeks are so attractive? I think so. We've got this post-Christian thing that you have to bottle up your physical emotions and your lusts, and then you break through into this kind of romantic ideal of love. But I think, as we're going to come on to see in the next Plato dialogue, I don't think it was like that for the Greeks. I think it was about keeping things in balance. It wasn't about shutting off the actual fucking. Yeah. The actual fucking is all good. That's
it's
good.
Just not letting it down.
But that's not. It's just not. That's not what it's all about. That's not on its own. It's,
the
everything
in
is
moderation.
a means to an end, basically. Everything in moderation. And you've got to have all the parts in balance. That doesn't mean not fucking. No. It means fucking and also philosophizing.
Yeah. A full life involves,
sodomizing a boy. I was trying to explain this to me, so I just hadn't got the language. I hadn't read this book. Actually, I think I had read this book, but.
The second point I want to make. The second point I want to make there is the accusation, which is relevant here, of blokiness.
Right.
Sometimes, I mean, notwithstanding Diotima,
the love expert.
The love expert. There's sometimes a bit of an argument against these books that they are essentially a bunch of guys sitting around having a drinking party, talking shit.
Heavy for fairly, yeah.
But the thing is, I think that's exactly what they are.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely fine for them to write a dialogue. I don't think that they need female representation. They don't need Ray Socrates to turn up.
But Socrates' wife is famous. Like, she's always being alluded to all the way through these. So wouldn't it be interesting to have a dialogue between their wives?
She's sort of like Norm from Cheers' wife Vera, always mentioned, or Maris from Frasier, who's mentioned but never actually appears.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, fantastic if we open a sort of old wine bottle and discover that there's a dialogue of Mrs. Socrates and they're all getting together. That would be. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm giving an idea for a book.
It's a great idea.
So that would be great. I don't personally feel there's an issue that there aren't female characters here, because this is capturing a form of men putting the world to rights kind of thing, which I think
these men are not sexually exploiting women.
No.
They're sexually exploiting young children. So it's fine. Okay, but. And there's a good philosophical reasons why that's fine.
Yeah, because that's an ideal form of love.
It's ideal.
in a very technical sense of ideal, that
in a
it's not the same as our sense, but it is where we get the term from.
It's very much like your old school, I think, this whole situation. Anyway, so Alcibiades breaks up the party, basically. Socrates, though, good lad, he's a great drinker. He just drinks through. He carries on drinking, and then he drinks through the night.
Like
talks
your
everyone
30th birthday party.
30 hours for 30 years, yeah.
It was brutal.
It was brutal, but we just carried on, and then got up the next day and just went off, carried on, basically. That's
we went into town.
Yeah, we went to the pub, I think.
We went to watch the boat race.
Yeah, in a really weird Irish pub in the
well, no, it wasn't. It was a sports bar, but they'd never heard of the boat race. And we were like, could you put the boat race on, because you're a sports bar, you're showing every single sport. They go, what's this, the boat race? Yeah, between who? They go, in Oxford and Cambridge
University. They were cheering, weren't they? Oxford,
and they were like,
Oxford, Cambridge.
We've never heard of this. This has been running a while. Anyway, if you remember, they didn't finish it. It was because that
Australian twat.
Denied an Oxford win. Anyway.
In danger of digressing. So, lots of thinking, lots of drinking. And it is really fantastic, compelling, great read, really short. This isn't really a book in itself, it's like a long chapter. All of the Plato's dialogues are like this. They're a dialogue with Socrates and other characters. There are ones which are perhaps more close to real conversations that happened, including, famously, the dialogues around the death of Socrates. And this is really moving. We've got to come on to this. That Socrates, he put his money where his mouth is. Okay, he pissed off a lot of people, basically, by asking all these questions, by questioning everything. That's what he went around doing. He questioned everything.
It's not just love or politics. He covers everything. I mean, one of my favourite dialogues by Plato about Socrates is the Euthyphro, where essentially they debate the nature of evil, the problem of evil, how can evil exist if there are good gods. It's cracking. You can read it in half an hour. It really, basically, the argument hasn't really moved on since his setting of it. So they're great, but he's constantly questioning everything. He's the person who goes around going, but why, like a child.
Right.
Plato obviously has a lot of sympathy for it, and he writes these up and collects his master's works after his death and publishes them. But at the time, Socrates is quite irritating to the people in charge.
Well, it's interesting you say that. So he's very bloody-minded, isn't he? He's whatever people say, he'll question it. And I kind of get the impression he eventually gets hauled up in court for introducing new gods is one of the charges against him, and corrupting young men. Whereas we know he's not corrupting young men. He's fucking them in the ass while teaching them some serious philosophy.
Yeah, so the corruption of the young, to be very clear, that Socrates is charged of, does not relate to
the underage buggery.
The underage buggery. That's fine. It's what he's talking to them about
what he's whispering in their ears while he's doing it.
It's the teaching. It's the schoolmastering.
Yeah.
Which
telling
is the
them to
problem.
be good people, for example. That was what was
to reflect on what the nature of a good life is, but to question everything, unacceptable.
Totally unacceptable.
If it just stuck to the High Court sense,
it'd be fine.
It'd be fine.
By the way, just on the point you're making about the blokiness, it is worth saying that Plato himself is criticised a lot for the way he deals with women, talks about women. He does say that women can be philosophers too, right? He's clear about that, and he acknowledges that women are actually better than men at some things.
And we've seen a universal support for Sappho, not a philosopher, a poet, but we they're not it's not a completely misogynistic culture. There are women thinkers and writers.
Female pancake making is better than male pancake making, and I think that's But he says women should be allowed to go to the gym too, completely naked, and even the ugly, wrinkly ones should be allowed to go to the gym. And
you can't say fairer than that.
I think that is very progressive. So where do we get to? So Socrates pissed off a lot of people, and he gets put on trial. And because he's such a difficult old bugger, instead of defending himself properly, he kind of argues himself into being executed.
Yeah.
Right? And I just like the idea that
he's not going to do what people expect.
No.
In this case, they expect him to defend himself.
Yeah,
so he decides not to.
He's always got to do the opposite of what everyone's saying.
Yeah, which I you kind of admire, but I'm not sure strategically
was very sensible. Well, I also think that there not an argument that everyone was so annoyed by him at this stage that actually what's happened is his followers, if they'd wanted to save him, they should have said, Socrates, you should die now, and these are the reasons. And he would have immediately said, but wait, what about the following arguments why I shouldn't, why I'm innocent? But because disastrously, surely they should know better by now, disastrously they say, Socrates, don't do it. Obviously he's going to say, but I can think of the following 5 reasons why I should die.
Do you think it's possible they'd had enough of the buggery?
And they got together.
Places got I'm ready to take over now.
For a start, my arse is so sore. Secondly, exactly, I'm ready.
The accusation that I say that they're laddish is immediately undercut by the fact that laddishness, I think, certainly in our culture, has this idea that you're a bunch of blokes talking derogatory about women. They are not. Women do not feature in any way in their thought at all. They're vaguely aware of women. They're married, some of them, but they basically, beyond pancake making, it just doesn't enter. And when they're talking about what's the best way to live, they're not really concerned with women at all. So it's not misogyny, it's almost like apathy.
Yes, yeah. And even as we've said, even their kind of romantic stuff and sexual stuff is all bound up with each other. Yeah, I have to say though, we're joking aside, the death of Socrates is famous for a good reason. It is very, very moving.
Yeah,
it's almost like a Christ-like figure by the end. Plato praise him.
By the time that Plato's writing, he definitely is.
Yes, that's right. And this was written down, subsequently, but presumably, a lot of people would have been there and known what happened. So there's a limit to how much this can have been changed.
I think he's a popular folk hero. He's beloved amongst many people, which
followers who
irritates people in charge. So he's put to death, and therefore, naturally, after his death, through Plato, who's less controversial, less contentious, he, in addition to spreading his own writing, is able to essentially write this huge defence of Socrates, so that now we receive him as this
amazing
great thinker.
Yeah. But I mean, it's amazing, isn't it, when they sort of say, right, you're going to be executed now, and it's death by poison, which you take hemlock in your wine. That's how he's going to die. And he's there surrounded by his friends and lovers, presumably some of them, and Plato himself, who doesn't usually feature himself in the dialogues, but he's there in this deathbed scene, and it is very moving. And he has to kill himself at sunset. The executioner comes in with the hemlock, and then one of his followers says, "Look, I know it's the sunset here, but you can still see the sun on the mountains over there, and let's carry on talking." And one of his followers bursts into tears and says, "Oh God, this is so unfair, and you're innocent, and you're being killed for something you're not guilty." And then Socrates says, "Well, would you rather I was being killed for something I had done?"
Yeah.
And Socrates is completely unfazed by it.
Yeah.
And then, good lad, he takes the hemlock, he takes the wine, and he just downs it in one.
Yeah.
And dies heroically. And
I have to say,
drinking and thinking to the very end.
it's a good way to go.
Oh, it's
certainly the best way to go if you're being executed.
Yeah.
When you think about subsequently hacking people's head off, crucifixion, hanging, you just go,
electrocution.
let me drink hemlock surrounded by my friends and lovers.
That's how I want to go out, basically. So I think we should raise a glass to Socrates.
To Socrates.
Cheers, good lad. So, where did we get to? Yeah, right. But, as you say, as Plato writes these dialogues, we're not sure exactly which order he's written them in, but you kind of get the sense that he's kind of got a bit fed up of just Socrates questioning everything, and he wants to put forward some positive theories, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's time to progress on. They come to a little bit. I mean,
but he's still using Socrates as a mouthpiece, right?
Yeah, Socrates becomes a character that he can write through. I think you sort of get this with modern philosophy students, which are immensely irritating. I used to teach philosophy at sixth form. And you begin by doing Descartes' Meditations 1 and 2.
Great place to start.
Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
The problem is that there are many teenage and undergraduate philosophers who do not wish to progress any further than radical skepticism and go, but how do we know everything? It's like, guys, it's great. It's 2 chapters of the book that you read. We will get to them, and it is the starting point by which you take down everything you know and question everything. You can't really stop there, or if you do, it's a bit irritating. Yeah. And essentially that's what Socrates was doing. He'd got to that point. So Plato's like, we're not really going to make much progress with understanding the world and everything in it if we just do radical questioning. So let's take that questioning. We've used that to overturn everything we thought we knew.
Up to now, yeah.
Now we need to begin.
Now we need to build.
Yeah, and Plato does that.
And he does that. And he does it, I'd say, most in perhaps his most famous dialogue, The Republic. It is an absolute cracker. It's a cracker.
It's a big beast. It's not short like your Cicero.
It's not. Oh, yeah, exactly. Or the Symposium, and indeed you can get editions where you get all of these in one book. So, which is why we're talking about them all together. And it is very, very densely thought about. So, there's this famous story from the ancient world that people found basically the first line of the Republic, which is Socrates saying, "I went down to the Piraeus, which is the port of Athens, to see the religious festival." And you just think that's just a scene-setting line. But supposedly they found that Plato had worked that line over and over, just changing it a little bit here, a little bit there. He'd obviously thought really intensely about it. And there are whole books basically written about just what that one line means and what it refers to. And you realise that Socrates has been put to death for introducing new gods, supposedly. This is one of the things he's accused of. Well, which is complete nonsense. It's complete nonsense, yeah. And he's rightly pointing out this is set in the past. This dialogue. He's going down to see that the Athenians themselves had introduced a new god, and everyone had been happy with that. Yeah. So it's immediately there's all this kind of political irony going on. He runs into some friends, and they start talking, and we happen to know all of the friends, not just Socrates, ended up the victims of political injustice as a result of the state coming after them, including Socrates himself. And there's also this kind of on a different level that the idea that Socrates is like the philosopher king, and he's coming down, descending to the sort of normal plane of normal people to sort of spread the word.
And whilst, like all literary criticism, you can say, you're reading allegory and which isn't there. I think the point is that in this work, which we should point out is about politics and how society is
and ethics
how you should govern. But a practical guide to what an ideal
Republic
polis looks like, a city looks like. It might casually read. It really does. It's very readable. It reads like
easy to read.
This happened and this happened. But there's a huge amount of cleverness going on underneath. It is a structured piece of literary writing.
Yeah, a structured piece of literary writing, a work of art, and an immense work of philosophy that contains a lot of Western philosophy across a whole different set of things. But it's so easy to read.
Yeah,
and you can actually laugh when you're reading it.
Yeah, Plato is so easy. Honestly, you can sit on a train reading Plato.
Yeah.
it'll grip you. You almost
Yeah,
stop.
yeah, absolutely,
it's great
absolutely. It's so easy to read, and you get characters in it, not just Socrates, and these little sort of vignettes. Like one of the guy who's hosting the kind of dinner where they're having this conversation is a guy called Cephalus. He's an old bloke. He doesn't take part in the dialogue because he's a bit old and sort of. But he just has a little bit where he's arguing with Socrates, and he sort of says, "Oh, to be honest, I'm so old now that I don't really get tormented by being horny anymore." And I just wondered, did that speak to you? That
very much so. Yeah, I mean, I think as we hit 40. No, but you're right. I mean, you just.
But why put that in? It's just a lovely little.
Yeah, you think it's going to be all very serious, but it isn't. It's about actual life lived.
Yeah.
I think it's worth saying, apart from the names like Cephalus and stuff, which are a bit unusual because they don't fall from our culture, I don't think you need to know anything to read these.
No.
I don't think you need to know who the gods are, what the battles are. I mean, I think like we're talking about in episode 6, or we talk about several other times, like, if you don't know what's going on, do you need a little bit of understanding to really negotiate yourself into culture? That might be true in some of the books we've got. In these, you pick them up.
And just go.
Go.
Absolutely. And it's just, you just suddenly
Or
in
you
the
just need to
conversation
remember, some people have slightly funny names. He's having a problem with his horniness. Or lack thereof.
Or lack thereof. Is it a problem?
Yeah.
It's not a problem I have encountered.
You've retained your libido, but just lost your hair.
I think it's the right way round, isn't it? We also have another great vignette here at the beginning, which is the character of Thrasymachus. And he was a real person. He was a writer of preludes, apparently, so it's fitting that he features what is effectively the prelude to the book. And
like preludes, as in doing the sort of like the trailers for a film, in a time.
in a time before Platonic thought.
Yeah. One man
has questioned everything.
Yeah.
Well, so he's he's like a cynical guy basically, and he's another one of these travelling philosophers like Socrates who kind of goes around. He's got his own follower, his own followers, and one of his own followers is there and takes up the argument after he is defeated. And basically has a good old row with Socrates.
When you say defeated, I think you sometimes see in like relatively modern films, where people have like a beatbox off or a dance off.
Right. This is a philosophy off.
Yeah, it literally is. Like going to go, whoa, man, yeah, and then someone steps forward and then attempts to defeat them in an argument, and then when they go, whoa, I've been defeated, man, and then someone else steps up. It's like tag team philosophy. This is what they did in the streets.
Yeah, and this was happening.
Can you imagine how good it would be to live there?
Great, fantastic.
Why don't we live in 4th century Athens?
I know.
4th century BC.
It sucks, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, I'm not sure I'll be happy with the amount of pederasty that's clearly socially required.
But yeah,
but presumably that's optional.
Presumably.
Yeah. I think you're taking one for the team. I think you're giving one for the team, to be clear.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, again, you come back to the Socrates and Plato, because Plato, what we know about Plato before Socrates.
Once he's the master,
he can do it whatever he wants.
So he becomes presumably the giver, not taker. What I'm saying is that's
I'm particularly fascinated by this particular.
Well, we discussed before.
But it is fascinating, right?
Yeah. I think it's in the Greeks. We've said before.
Are you literally asking me if did Plato go on top? Socrates.
I think Plato went on top to Socrates, but Plato was underneath Socrates, went on top at the same time. It wasn't the Plato sandwich because the ages wouldn't have worked.
No, it would have been. That would have been all wrong. That would have been all wrong.
Yeah.
So, anyway. Back to the philosophy.
But if they ever publish a collected works of their stuff, that should be the front cover image.
With Alexander sort of, looking on in
with
the
knife.
Apparently Plato, what we know about him before you met Socrates is that he wore a lot of jewellery.
Yeah, and Plato's not his name.
No, but I just read this. You know what Plato was like a nickname?
Yeah, so I think his name's Aristides.
What? How? Who knew? I mean,
nearly everyone, I think, apart from you.
I studied Plato. So
I think it's Aristides' name, and Plato just means like broad. He's like a big guy. He's a big muscly sort of wrestler.
Just the way that Socrates likes him.
And then like go, I think it's the Greek word for that is Platon.
And he probably, that's quite a good nickname, isn't it? You take that. So he's like, okay, call me that.
It's a bit like Stalin, or like they've all got like pen names.
Yeah. So broad. Yeah, fair enough. And
big guy.
He's a big guy. He's a big guy.
That's what
poor old Aristotle. So the other thing we know about him is that he wrote plays. He wrote plays, and then when he met Socrates, he burned them all.
Yeah.
But I think that the fact that in the dialogues, and particularly in the Republic, you get some of the drama coming through. So I think that you can see that.
I mean, if you could rescue a lost book, I mean, we've talked a lot about lost books now.
Wouldn't
we'll talk more about when it comes to Aristotle.
To have like the lost play of Plato.
Because we sort of discussed at one of the early episodes about how we think that Pliny's library might still exist in Herculaneum.
Yeah.
And we might get it. But and we think, maybe we'll get some of the Aristotle's works, but we know that we won't have these. These are books which just
Plato himself
destroyed.
Yes.
But if, again, time machine, would you go back for Plato's place, or would you want to go and try and find another?
Well, it's interesting to say that,
Aristophanes?
we always say, look, and we'll probably say this when we come to adaptations, there are one or two, but there's not a kind of tradition of performing these dialogues with different actors doing the different parts.
I have been speaking about this for however long this podcast has taken to record.
You've totally persuaded me.
Genuinely, And I wonder, do you remember we had a mad idea when we were at university about writing people, giving them lots of money to create enduring copies of books which would last forever. We're obviously thinking about this idea a long time ago. I don't know if you remember. It was what was
granite.
Yeah. Or we would sort of publish it on a plastic paper, and they would be buried in salt mines, and they would be like the great works. And I think this is clearly inspired us.
Yes, yeah.
And I suspect that there are things like this which exist. There are copies in the Library of Congress and stuff. But to ensure future civilization would happen. Obviously, we will be making granite etchings of this.
Yeah, this 100 books and my books as well.
Well, what I mean is,
I see, of this podcast. Yeah.
If you imagine large records like on vinyl, but made out of granite stones.
Yeah, exactly.
10 huge discs and a record player.
So Aristotle wrote dialogues, just like Plato, but we don't have them.
We were talking about dialogues.
Right.
So
yes.
early on. So I don't think that's going to go anywhere. Our great idea to do that, it clearly hasn't worked out. This is a sort of evolution of it.
Yes.
But I genuinely, and I mean this, I invite other people to write in to be interested, who maybe have connections either themselves involved in theatre or not. I genuinely think that we could set up a theatre company.
Just did the dialogue.
I mean, I don't know anything about theatre company, but people could help us set up a theatre company where that was the thing that we did. And then we produced them. Yeah,
it's a great idea. It's a great idea.
Or we video them and put them on YouTube.
Well, so shortcuts. There is a version of the Symposium done, but set in a kind of Victorian public school. Weirdly, I guess because all the pederasty by Jonathan Miller back in the '60s. Now that would be a really interesting take, wouldn't it? But, yes, as a sequel to Warriors. But I do think that there is a point, isn't there, that the dialogue. I think it's a shame that dialogues don't exist anymore. I think it's definitely a shame that modern philosophy is not written in dialogue form. But could you say that modern theatre is the product both of ancient theatre, which we talked about in different podcasts, and of dialogues, because this is ideas being talked about by different characters. You would get in a modern play, but you probably wouldn't get a modern play trying to kind of set out a new philosophy of something.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I know I sometimes allude to EastEnders, which I haven't watched in 20 years. I know that they had this tradition of a couple of times a year just doing 2 Hamlet episodes. That is to say, they were normally just either closing time at the pub or sitting on a park bench. You would just have 2 characters
just talking.
Now, I sort of occasionally watched EastEnders because my mother was an aficionado. And I always loved it when you realised you'd stumbled over one of the 2 parts, because I thought it was a bit of an air to show them. I thought, actually, instead of this just being gripping but somewhat, disposable drama, the actual ability to write a half-hour dialogue when normally someone's talking about vengeance or justice, it deals with one of these issues. Yeah. Now, I'm not suggesting that there's up there with Plato. What I'm suggesting is, a time where they move beyond that kind of who's sleeping with who to talk about the feelings that they had afterwards. And there's clearly this sort of dramatic tradition that some of these script writers in the writing room were clearly they had drama, they had master's degrees. And I go, what, I'd quite like to write something.
It's a shame that tradition hasn't.
I still think it is. Yeah.
I think the key point here is you get all the.
I'm not suggesting the cast of EastEnders are our first people to go to for performing Jethro. Starring Ian Beale.
It's not worth it, you slag. Danny Dyer comes and says, "Oh, wait, what would the perfect way of organising politics be? Let's have a think." You slags. Drinks all round. It's worth going back to where we are. So the beginning. So Thrasymachus comes.
What is the perfect way of organising politics?
I'm just about to tell you.
Yeah, tell us. Go on.
I'm going to tell you. Yeah. So Thrasymachus says, look, the question is actually even more fundamental than that: is what is the good? What is justice? How should basically how should we live our lives, and how should we organise our politics?
We're going to jump in. Politics here comes from the Greek word for polis, to mean the city. So the polis is the city and the people who live there. They're known as the polis, which is where we get political or politic from. Because the Greeks live in cities, they think that's the natural way of doing stuff.
Well, it is, isn't it? I mean, if anyone is listening from the countryside, well, they won't be, will they? Because they can't really read people in the countryside, can they? probably don't understand any
You see, you
podcast
are
is.
from London, but you're not in London, are you? right now.
I've
You've got to fight your way back.
Fortified train.
Like Xenophon.
Yeah, exactly, and it takes about as long as well. But Thrasymachus says he's a cynical guy, Thrasymachus. He basically says justice is the interest of the stronger. In other words, morality is created by the strong to help them rule over the weak. And basically, it's in your interest to break the rules. And the most powerful and happiest, successful person who will become a tyrant of his city will be someone who obeys what's been called Gaddafi's law. Just if it feels good, do it.
Yeah,
fuck everyone else.
Survival of the fittest. The rules are made by the strongest. Certainly, we've met people. You meet people all the time who obviously have that approach. To suggest that is what justice is a bold statement.
But he supports it in an amazing way. And I have to say, when I read this when I was 15, it changed my life. And I was so kind of discombobulated by this challenge that Thrasymachus throws down that I've been trying to live my life as a Thrasymachiean kind of sort of cynical bastard.
I'm not sure
that
the Republic advocates that position.
It doesn't.
Just presents it.
But is it
Do you have to agree with Plato?
Does Plato agree with Socrates? So Socrates defeats Thrasymachus and basically knocks him out, and then, as you said, Thrasymachus is a kind of tag team, and some other guys come in and take over Thrasymachus' argument and make an even stronger version of the same case. And my position is that Plato actually agrees with them.
Plato is a bit fascisty at points. Like, he's a bit of a right-winger.
I think
fascist could be
right wing or left wing. I mean, he wants to abolish money and keep all goods in common. I don't know.
It's true. Okay, I think that's it. Plato has views that we would not represent as modern liberal democratic, but they're very well argued for. I'm not suggesting he's not the Andrew Tate of the day.
No.
He's a sound person, but the idea that you're meant to go in and realise that Plato is necessarily right. You're free to walk away from these dialogues with your own conclusions.
Oh, totally. And I think there are certainly points where Plato is not agreeing with Socrates.
Yeah.
And I think you get that at the beginning of the Republic. And basically, they kind of go back to Socrates and says, sorry, that argument doesn't really work. You're going to have to try harder than that. And we're going to pose this.
Do you think that's something that Socrates actually said, and that Plato is now going, upon reflection, I'm not sure my master was right about that?
Exactly. This is the moment where we're leaving Socrates behind and we're getting into Plato. And I think that, this is one of the reasons why it's so dramatic.
It's great, isn't it, to have the fact that all we know about Socrates, we know from what was written down. We know he's a real person, but we know that the version of the Platonic Socrates, as in the Socrates as written by Plato, is not the real Socrates. So obviously the Platonic Socrates is perhaps the ideal Socrates.
Yeah, well, indeed, and we've got a bit of Socrates in Xenophon dialogues, funny enough, but it's a different guy.
And Xenophon's not as good. He's not.
Stick to what you know.
Anabasis,
So the thought experiment in this sort of reissuing of Thrasymachus' challenge is: what if you find a ring that makes you invisible? And brilliantly, this goes back to Gyges, who we've met before. This is the bloke who sees the queen.
I saw a film about this.
Right.
3 films.
Where do you think Tolkien gets the idea, right? Basically, in this version, the way that Gyges takes over is that he gets a ring that allows him to become invisible. And, what do you do if you have a ring that makes you invisible? Well, the answer is you go creep into the queen's bedroom and see her naked, and then you take over the world. That's exactly what I think
we've all considered at times, through, probably the Invisible Man.
Right.
Rather than Gyges' ring. But it comes from that. That's the thing. You've all, listeners, had this thought experiment. You just didn't realise it went back to Plato. If I could make myself invisible, particularly if I could make myself invisible and immaterial.
Yeah, you're powerful. You get away with it, basically.
Who
would I see naked?
Who would I see naked?
And in what order?
Is the thing you think about when you're sort of 14 or 15.
Your mum.
Yeah. Then you start thinking all the things I do. So suppose the question is, genuinely ask yourself, if you could be invisible, would you rob a bank? I suppose it becomes a question. Assume that if you put money in your pocket, it becomes invisible. Right? I know you have subsequent questions, but if you
have to take your clothes off.
Well,
because then you see your clothes.
Yeah, that's how it happened in the most recent Invisible Man film.
You don't want the ring to slip off suddenly, and you're there in the middle of the bank, bollock naked.
See, my problem with the most recent Invisible Man film
would you go and see the current queen naked?
The current queen?
Well, which queen are we on here? But the current queen. Well, either queen, any queen. Which queen would you?
You mean the
queen?
Right,
the queen.
The Queen of the United Kingdom.
I don't understand why you're finding this difficult.
The Queen of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, the Queen.
Camilla.
Well, I don't know when we recorded this.
We're not doing this out of order anymore. We've done this. We're recording it now.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Queen Camilla. Would you see her naked?
No. Are you asking me about the next queen?
You fucking traitor. Well, we're going to have to agree to disagree.
I thought you were more a fan of the Princess of Wales.
Well, I'd certainly, I mean, There is an argument,
The
isn't
current Princess of Wales, not the previous one. The one that exists now. Why are we suddenly second-guessing? Right.
We seem to have got... Anyway, the point is... So
if we had any royal
is,
followers at this point, we just lost them. What are you talking about? I don't know. Why do I want to go see the Queen naked?
The question is that if you could get away with anything...
Would you?
Would you? And that Socrates, basically... Or the alternative is an even harder question. If by being a good boy and obeying all the rules and all that stuff, you're still accused of being a bad guy and killed for it, right? So that's your choice.
Yeah.
Which is going to be better? What's the right thing to do? What's going to make you happier?
Well,
and Socrates, the challenge is he has to prove that it's actually better. Not only do you say, no, I don't want the ring, I'm not going to see the Queen naked, I'm also going to be blamed for something that isn't my fault, but I'm going to know that I've lived a good life.
Should you, to sum up, should you do the right thing because it is the right thing, and how do you know what that is? Yeah. Or if you wouldn't, there's no possibility of being detected, would you do the wrong thing?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that the whole of the Republic is Socrates' answer to that. It's very moving, it's very powerful, it doesn't really work, and therefore, I think Thrasymachus was right. And
I love the book, I love the work, it's fantastic. I don't want to live in Plato's Republic, though.
No, I don't. Well, so the problem is that Socrates has...
What results? Basically, at the end of all his arguments, he puts forward an argument of what an ideal world will look like.
Well, hang on. You're getting ahead of us, because he puts forward two arguments, I think. And one of them is, I think, really powerful, and one of them is hopeless. And the first one is that he says that basically what will make you happy is if your soul is in balance, and your soul has three parts.
Yeah.
He says you've got basically your brain, you've got your bodily needs,
your physical health,
and let's say we've got a lot of those in this shed right now, but you've also got your emotional needs and your sort of love of honour and basically sort of brain, heart, and loins, I think.
Loin, because his needs are lust. He's all about passions.
Yeah. But the fact that there are three rather than two, I think, is a much more interesting way of thinking about us. And like Freud has pretty much the same trichotomy, if you can use that.
But again, that's probably not a coincidence.
No, it's not.
He's probably read Plato.
Yeah, completely. I think that's really good, and the idea that what will make a successful life is not, I have to obey my bodily lust like Gyges, or I have to be some kind of our idea of a sort of the philosopher who completely restrains all of his lust and even his emotions, and just is a pure reasoning thinker. Those are both wrong. You need to be able to keep all parts in balance, all parts happy. You
can't let your mind. You can't be a slave.
You can't be a slave to any one of them, and they've all got to be in harmony. And I think that is so powerful.
And none of them are better than the other.
And this is where we get into the Platonic fucking, right?
None of them are better than the other. That's the important thing. Like the later idea which creeps in through later philosophy and to Christianity, and the spirituality is subordinate. Is a higher level than the physicality, which actually isn't in Christianity. It's a Greek version of it. It's a later Greek one, ironically. That's completely rejected here. Your lust is just as much a part of you as your emotional well-being and your
mental part of that.
You've got to recognise that.
He's got an interesting little vignette, Leontius the Necrophile.
Yeah.
Right, and Leontius the Necrophile.
Why did I assume you were going to bring that one?
Well, it's just interesting. I mean, he loves. He knows it's wrong. He just loves it. And what's he supposed to do? Right? What happens when there are inevitably tensions between what the different parts of you want? Right, and this is where Plato comes up with basically virtue ethics.
Yeah.
And it's an ethical system, very powerful. One of the three kind of current.
Which is normally associated with Aristotle, it's fair to say.
Yeah, but Plato's got the same idea, and I think this is very powerful stuff. And I think he makes quite a good case that.
Sorry, do you want to just describe what virtue ethics is?
Why don't you?
Okay, well, we'll talk about it more when we come to Aristotle, but essentially the virtue ethics consist in, rather than believing, there's essentially, as you were just about to say, I think, three approaches to ethics. This is a massive oversimplification, but essentially you consider that there are certain universal rules which you should always follow, which you can either get from commandments from God, or you can work out what they are, and essentially ethics consists of sticking to those rules.
Stick to the rules.
Yeah, and then those rules can be like treating people like you'd like to be treated, or whatever. They don't have to be. But essentially, as long as you follow the rules, you won't go wrong. There's another one where you make every ethical decision dynamically, and you consider what is the best for you and the other people. The greatest good of the greatest number of people.
Utilitarianism is
exactly.
Yeah,
so an approach which basically says, look, there's no point in having any rules. You just need to always look at the outcomes. So essentially, they're the opposite positions. Virtue ethics takes a middle position and essentially says that there are certain behaviours, attitudes, dispositions, approaches which you should adopt, and taking those as your guide will steer you on the correct path. Now, Aristotle will come to talk about how we determine what they are, and we'll talk about that in the golden mean. But essentially, if you want to have a good example, look at the concept of lying, okay? Right. So some people will say, we shouldn't lie, because it says in the Bible you shouldn't lie.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be the first approach, the rule-based system. You might say, well, it's okay to lie sometimes, because it depends what the lie is. So if we take a utilitarian approach as an outcome...
Does my bum look big in this?
Yeah, are there Jews hiding behind the false bookshelf on the mezzanine landing? You know?
Is it a comfortable temperature in the shed?
Yeah, so all of these things. Yeah. I think it's a bit better now that the sun has moved.
Well.
The virtue ethics would sort of essentially say you shouldn't lie because you don't want to be a liar. Like as simple as looking in the mirror, do you consider that when you reflect on yourself, when you philosophically reflect on yourself as a person, the great work of art that is you in your life, do you wish to be the sort of person who is considered to be a liar? And even if no one knows, that you know yourself to be a liar.
Yeah, that's what you know.
Yeah, you know.
Gyges might get away with it, he's got the ring on, but he knows.
Yeah, he is a liar. Whereas, or do you want to basically essentially have the idea of a self-respect that you are living your life according to the values, the virtues that a person would do? Now, Aristotle then does subsequent work to help us work out what those virtues are, because that becomes more difficult, and it's great work. I mean, I would consider myself an Aristotelian virtue ethicist.
Yeah, I think I would too. Well, he even says, philosophers will kind of try and create an example of, he doesn't mention this one obviously because it never always, but the famous, the train's going down the tracks, and you say two people...
The trolley problem.
Right, and Aristotle says, can't possibly answer these questions, and in real life it's much more complicated than that. You're asking the wrong question. Don't ask what to do in a certain circumstance, ask who to be. And that all comes from this insight of Plato's. And I think it's really powerful. Virtue ethics. You say, I think I'm a virtue ethicist.
What can you live with? Who should you be? Yeah. What do you strive to be? If you look at yourself and go, actually, I'm not sure I think of my life as something I'm striving to be, well, you're doing it all wrong.
Yeah.
Because every day you should be attempting to strive yourself to be something.
How are you doing, by the way, according to your own virtues?
Well, it's a constant... it's a constant struggle, and that's the whole point. I mean, Aristotle...
I'm smashing it. I think I'm serious. I'm just saying it. I'm being brilliant.
Aristotle says, essentially, that a virtue always exists... It's not the opposite of a vice, but actually sits between two opposing vices. So, and I think that's key. And once you get that idea, you really get what he's talking about. So
you don't want to be drunk out of your mind, but you don't want to be sober either. You want to be somewhere in the middle.
So, in terms of, party...
Speaking of which...
Or ginger beer in his hot shed... In terms of a party, an attitude of sociability, you don't want to be the sort of person who doesn't socialise, but you don't want to be one of those people who's out of control and just never takes anything serious.
Smashing the place up.
Exactly. What you want is to be somewhere in the middle, not a boring middle, because they're really all into partying and wild, pederastic sex.
Right.
But the point is that, within control. Likewise, do you want to be, honesty? You don't want to be honest to the point that you hurt feelings.
Yes, darling, your bum does look big enough.
Yeah, but at the same time you don't want to be a liar. So he says, once you think of what is the correct way to behave, if you imagine two opposing vices, the golden mean, the virtue, is the one that you should sing for. And I think this is genuinely transformed my life. In terms of, I want to be the sort of person who is generous and helps other people, but not the sort of person who's always taken for a ride and exploited. Everything
this is why you never buy around.
Everything can be seen in these terms. Well, one neither wants to be a miser with all money, nor profligate.
No, okay.
And I think once you get that, that's it. That's the whole. I mean, there's a lot of books written on it, but that is the whole of ethics. And as you say, Aristotle really builds it up. But and we'll talk about that in a second. But Plato, it arrives in Plato, and it's the correct answer.
It's the correct answer. Yeah. And then he goes and spoils it all by saying, and I've got an even better argument, which is, imagine that we're not talking about an individual with three parts to the soul. We're talking about a city with three classes, and it's basically that
one.
It's like, well, okay, it's got to do a lot of work here, and basically let's work out what the ideal city is, and then that will tell us what the ideal person is. And it's a bit like that, that old sketch.
As if there's classes where there's a thinking class,
a middle class, and then a sort of everyone else doing the work.
Yeah.
And you think, okay, hang on a minute. I know, I look up to him, but I look down on him. And
and they're not equal classes either.
No way.
It completely undercuts his... I mean, they're not equal in terms of numbers. No. So the whole system doesn't work. He gets the correct answer, and then he tries to come up with this idea of what an ideal city would look like, with him as made to be in charge because they're the thinking class.
Well, that's the point,
but they're not held... It contradicts his own argument that these things are in balance.
Yeah, totally.
Whereas actually, if you look at something like the British Constitution,
has,
I think, attempted in some senses to go, well, there's checks and balances balances. We
Right.
have hereditary stuff. We have elected stuff. We don't have direct election, but we have local council. I'm not suggesting it's all based on Plato's Republic, but there is a mixed economies attempt to actually build in, even like American separation of powers, talking about tripartite separation. I mean, again.
Well, I think Aristotle, basically has come to that conclusion, isn't he, when he thinks about his politics. He's like he reacts to Plato and points out, as you pointed out, some quite unattractive features, shall we say, of this system. Although Aristotle quite likes the idea of the philosophers being in charge, but he basically says, we want something that's not a million miles away from what we've got, a kind of constitutional democracy. Bear in mind the direct democracy in Athens, which was not working for these guys, because that's what killed Socrates and sent Aristotle into exile.
When we talk about Rome. There comes a certain point where
there's a reason you need some checks and balances.
Direct democracy doesn't work if you're talking about a city, but actually Athens is not a city, it's an empire. We sort of discussed that. Rome is not a city, it's an empire. They try to carry on behaving like they're a city and only having the people who are citizens being able to vote, but actually you can't.
Thucydides says direct democracies can't run an empire, basically, and they learnt it the hard way, and these guys put their money where their mouth is.
Question on the British. I mean, it wasn't direct democracy, but it was.
It was a mixed system. Yeah. There was a bit of oligarchy in there, a bit of aristocracy, a bit of royal family, and
works a treat.
Bit of democracy.
Yeah.
Works on a non-controversial position.
Hold on, what happened to the necrophiliac?
History doesn't relate.
But what's the answer? Like, what is he meant to do? What's the ethical approach?
Commit necrophilia, I think, is the...
Well, I mean, you could argue, I'm just like...
Just a bit of necrophilia.
No, what I'm saying
a bit of mild necrophilia.
He has passions.
Yeah.
Those passions relieve him.
It doesn't harm anyone.
It doesn't harm anyone, because unless you assume that desecration of the dead is an actual.
Well, I think they would have thought that. The Greeks would.
Yeah, but what you're saying today, like if you're necrophilia, what's your position on this? What do you think the virtue ethical position is today?
So,
what would you recommend for someone struggling with any? And by the way, listeners, if you have been affected by any
by necrophilia, then you're probably not listening anymore. I see you.
Right,
not a victim of necrophilia.
Yeah, you're affected by it, but not a victim.
Right, I see. I mean, I don't have a problem with necrophilia. I think it's a happy days. Go for it, chaps. What's our message?
As long as you're the Plato to the Aristotle, or the Aristotle to the Plato.
Yeah, and indeed, people donate their organs, don't they?
Yeah.
So why not?
You're saying as long as it's donated,
there should be. Yeah. Well, that's the point. So and frankly, anyone who's not a virtue ethicist. Someone who genuinely, cares in a utilitarian fashion should leave their body to the necrophiles.
Yeah.
And that just shows you why utilitarianism is nonsense, isn't it?
Well, that reason and that reason alone. We'll talk more about this when we get to John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, what books about necrophilia have we got coming in the greatest 100 books? None that I could think of.
Well, we'll come back to this when we talk about utilitarianism.
So, back to Plato's Republic, he's got some pretty odd stuff going on there, right? There's no escape from it. He's got eugenics.
Yeah.
He's got communal childcare.
Which
you give up your kids to the
which
society.
means there's a rule that you're
can't
not
know who's
allowed.
yours.
Yeah, so you're not allowed to have sex with people in age bands to make sure
so you can't.
He actually have sex with your own children.
Well, but could you have non-procreative sex with a boy?
Yeah, that's fine.
That's in fact, it's probably compulsory.
But there's a rule about marriage because they marry younger people, but
right.
You can't marry anyone who was born within a certain period either side of when you had a child. Now, of course, generally, if you marry people your own age, not much younger people, this issue wouldn't come up. But that clearly is an insane revolution. that is no sensible country can run.
Right, we're talking about the ideal republic here. Come on.
Hang on. It's free love, but with checks and balances.
But this is it. Why do all utopias always end up in... Oh, and by the way, we're in charge and there's free love.
Yeah.
It's funny that, isn't it? He does have some sensible things. He says, he famously says, let's get rid of or banish all the poets. Banish all the lawyers.
Yeah.
Now, that is pretty good. But then he ruins it. He says, no drinking. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, which is odd, because he's clearly attending some advantage.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't. Maybe that's why he doesn't appear in these symposia.
Maybe they didn't invite him.
Maybe
they didn't invite him. Maybe they just are not bloody Plato.
Which is why Aristotle makes a point about drinking in moderation.
Well, as we said,
but he doesn't want to get.
The virtuous thing to do is to be partially drunk.
He's in favour of virtue, but he certainly wouldn't be in charge of what we consider virtue signalling. Now he wouldn't have any truck with that.
Well, virtue. I mean, I do think that the Republic does sound a little bit like a sort of it's a joyless tyranny of virtue signalling philosophers who are also sexually exploiting younger people.
What, like a university in the 21st century?
Well, but it's funny you should say that. Of course, Plato, once Socrates is out of the way, found the first university.
Yeah.
And it's called the Academy.
Yeah, where we get the term academy.
Yeah, it's where these original
Academic,
academics, right? And there's that Horace phrase where he's talking about Plato's Academy, the groves of academia. It was in a grove. It was literally in a grove. And then Aristotle comes along and studies there. He's at the sharp end for 20 years.
Aristotle is a student at the
And eventually he's had enough, and he founds a new university called the Lyceum,
which is where the French use.
Which is where the French, you say, right? But I don't know whether did they have better facilities there? It's like a better grove, or was it kind of
no?
frowned
Actually,
on?
we look at the again. I did a bit of googling about the ruins of these places, and the Lyceum seemed to have been a bit more
better facilities.
No,
basically.
I don't think so. I think it was relatively.
It
was a large grove. You can visit the ruins of the Lyceum.
Can you?
Yeah.
Oh my god, I'd love to do that. Yeah. I would love to.
Apparently, it's not much to see, but again, you can see that on these, in this sacred grove, some of the great thoughts happened.
Right, yeah.
Some
cracking sets. Can you imagine what Freshers Week would be like at the Academy? To break in
mind,
the
emotion, and lust were satisfied.
Yeah, exactly. And it'd be like, instead of sort of all going out partying and sleeping with each other, the students would be, they'd be offered up to the
professors.
Yeah, a bit of fresh meat. So, yeah, it's a bit tricky. Also, it doesn't record in Gallipolis, the beautiful city, the Republic, do they have slaves? He doesn't mention it. And it's particularly interesting, this, because...
Do you think that's because it's so obvious that they have slaves?
Well, possibly. In which case, I think we've got a problem, because there's an amazing story that this seems to have been quite possibly true. Plato did not think of this as a thought experiment. He was deadly serious about this stuff. Right? 9 of his students went on to become tyrants in towns and cities. And he himself tried to set up a kind of version of this.
A tyrant, where that is actually a technical term.
Yeah, like a Gaddafi,
yeah.
basically. Yeah, and he himself tried to set one up in Syracuse with the ruler of Syracuse, and he basically, that faction lost. He got sold into slavery, apparently. And one of his friends basically bought him out. You would have thought that experience and the humanity of the guy and the thinking, why didn't he address this question that these societies are founded on slavery?
I think the two things to say is, one, it was just understood as part of the human condition, and the second thing is it's really important, especially
they're questioning everything else.
Especially for our listeners who might be in the United States, or for anyone who is younger than, let's say, the age of 30. When we talk about slavery, we're not talking about the transatlantic chattel slavery.
No, there's no racial element to this.
There's no racial, and also the treatment. Whilst slaves had no rights under the law, I think they could become loved and trusted members of the family. So I'm not suggesting that slavery was a good thing, but when we talk about slavery, we're not talking about it was the systemic evil that it was in the United States in the 18th and 19th century.
Yeah, okay, I'd take that point. It's not.
And the Asian slave.
Well, I don't think it would be much fun being a slave in like the mines or something. No,
but like a house slave would probably be all right. I mean, it's not great. Don't get me wrong. You want to be a free person. Why wouldn't you? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that you shouldn't think of it as.
But it's just a fascinating gap. They question everything else, but they don't question that. Anyway, so there are, as you said, basically there are some very unattractive aspects to this city. But I don't
want to live in the Republic.
I don't want to live there either. No, I really don't. But I think it is an absolutely cracking book. It's an amazing read. It's so powerful and moving and interesting. And
if you understand it in the Republic, generally, when you read any of Plato's dialogues, you end up supporting the view that you think that Plato is supporting. And as long as you are happy that when you read the Republic, you're happy that you might go, aren't I supposed to agree with what Plato's clear position is? No, it's fine. You can believe that you can say, you can come to a different conclusion. Because everything's relatively even-handed. As long as you accept that, that's fine. If you want someone to tell you what to think, Plato's probably not your person anyway. No, in this case, but he's generally speaking correct.
I agree, yeah.
But not on this one.
Not on this one, no. But on the way, what a journey. He's invented philosophy. Economics is in there, sociology, and it's also just a cracking read. It's a great story. I could do with some more wine, actually.
A moment later, they heard the voice of Alcibiades in the courtyard, very tipsy and shouting, wanting to know where Agathon was and demanding to be taken to Agathon. He was helped in by the flute girl and some of his other companions. He stood in the doorway, crowned with a thick wreath of ivy and violets, from which a number of ribbons hung about his head, and said, "Good evening, gentlemen. Will you welcome into your company a man who is already drunk? Utterly drunk?"
We've basically finished with Plato, but I think it's fair to say that I've already jumped the gun a little bit talking about some of the Aristotelian ideas, which are cracking. And we started right at the beginning and talked about, when we think of Plato and Aristotle, they disagree about lots of different things, but nowadays it's more framed as this great difference of opinion they had about the true nature of things, whether there is this ideal world that our world is essentially a shadow of, which is not just a sort of pointless speculation. It's an attempt to, like, if that is true, then the way to live in this life is to try and find out what the ideal form is, and try and understand how our reality subsists in this ideal form. Nearly everyone alive now is an Aristotelian. It hasn't always been so the case. Who is the top dog? Aristotle and Plato has gone backwards and forwards.
Yeah. All the Neoplatonic stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the first. Actually, it's probably easy to say that from the first millennium, first millennium of the Christian era, Plato was a big guy. Yeah, and then essentially from about the 12th, 13th century, mainly the 13th century, with the work of people like Albertus Magnus, Thomas Aquinas, Peter Abelard to a certain extent, essentially Aristotle was rediscovered because his works is
now just chopped off, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
So Abelard.
So the Arabs sort of keep Aristotle going, don't they? And
we lose all our copies of it, but some copies make their way translated into Arabic and then translated actually into Latin, and then sort of so Europe rediscovers the work of Aristotle, and I think since that point, Aristotle, even up to today, is.
Because then Byzantines have kept Plato going, and he's also been lost to the West, and then he's reintroduced in the Renaissance, and there's a kind of century or two where Plato sort of comes along, and everyone rediscovers Plato, and is like, oh, we have the Renaissance now, this is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, Aristotle versus Plato thing, and how it's played out over 2,000 years is great, because they're fundamentally different ways of viewing the world. Whether you look at, essentially from a top-down view of Plato, that there's an ideal perfect world and ours is a shadow of it, or that world does not really exist, but we could infer a theoretical, hypothetical version of what the true reality is.
From the reality that we observe.
And I think it's fair to say that now, Aristotle, because it aligns more with our scientific method, which he essentially invented, is the major winner. So I think the reason I'm saying this is if our readers go away and read up a little bit about Aristotle and Plato, or the fight between them, they'll probably go, wait, Aristotle is basically the case. Yeah, that is because you live in a world where Aristotelian thought underpins it. Yeah. You could have been born 200 years previously, or 300 years, and that wouldn't have been the case. That might not be the case in the future. There are some arguments in favour of Plato, but what is main point is that we're still having an argument about these two people who knew each other, probably had sex with each other, growth. These two Athenians. Yeah.
They set the whole thing going, and they're still.
Those are really the only two major models between understanding the entire universe and all approaches to knowledge.
Absolutely. And indeed, can I just say, we're wearing some teamwear today in honour of these two gents.
Yeah, so what do you want to describe? You bought me some socks.
So you're sporting some Aristotle socks, and I'm some Plato ones. Yeah, and I got Plato, and we've got little pictures of these guys, beards, a quiver, on the socks.
So really are cracking. Now, you have, as well as the socks, do you have this like a legend written around yours?
Oh, I didn't sort of that. No, I think it's just a pattern. I think it's a pattern.
And there are... I think ideal forms.
Floating around. Yeah.
I'm
not sure, whereas you've got some actual observable stuff there.
I think there's it's quite an interesting approach to socks to try and distill the great philosophical debate at the heart of all.
Does it count as a shortcut, this pair of socks?
You can buy these socks. I mean, they are fantastic, and I'm really grateful for these Aristotle. I mean, interestingly, I'm not sure if I am an Aristotle man.
Oh, I'm interested you say that. I assumed you would be for the sort of. Basically, for Christian reasons, I love them both, but
I love them both. I think I love them both. I'm an Aristotle on everything except for the philosophy, where I think I incline more platonically.
I think I'm the other way around. I think I disagree with Plato's conclusions, but he's such a hero. Whereas, who do you want to go drinking with?
Well, absolutely Plato.
I think so.
Yeah. How old is Plato and how old am I? So I go drinking. But these socks are absolutely great, and the fact that they make philosopher socks tell you how important these people are. Totally. I mean, I should also point out it is the hottest day in the year. Why are we wearing? I might take the socks off at some point because they are an unnecessary layer.
Or do they do pants as well?
Do they?
I don't know. We have to look into it.
Do you reckon there are any other philosophers? Do you think there's Socrates socks? Socrates.
They've got to be missing a trick if they haven't done that.
Well, you say missing a trick, they must have it.
I will look that up.
Yeah, but I mean, put it this way, going back to Thales, he hasn't got any socks.
No. One of the things I find really attractive about Aristotle, by the way, is his conception of the good life. It owes a lot to Plato, but it's just... It's very compelling, this idea of eudaimonia.
Interesting.
How he
Again,
just-
yet
how he
again,
talks
I would
about it.
I would say eudaimonia.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you're wrong, but I'm perfectly, what's pronunciation between friends?
So there is a Greek word, which we're disagreeing about the pronunciation of, which is translated to English usually as flourishing,
Yeah.
sometimes as happiness,
Yeah.
but I think flourishing is a better translation.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, there is sometimes a subject at school, like PSHE, that you have to do.
Oh, yeah.
There are some schools where they call it eudaimonia, because it's all about understanding the correct way of flourishing, which I think is a fantastic approach. In fact, that should be a compulsory subject.
Better than PHSE.
Yeah.
If your teacher touches you in an inappropriate way, in the pub or whatever, what do you
but,
do?
But also the voting system.
Depends if it's Better or if it's Socrates.
Yeah. So if you're taken to a grove,
Ring this number.
but yeah, and actually, there's a real sensible argument to have about how little education is actually spent on this topic, whereas actually the argument should be the fundamental subject. But just on this, eudaimonia. Aristotle has this conception that the purpose of life, because we right at the beginning, is essentially flourishing, that the human should flourish in their life. There are obviously common ways in which all human beings might flourish, and so there are certain behaviours which you might lead to a general sense, if you do this, that will lead to flourishing. But also there's a specific and individual element, which I think is very appealing, which is that, it is about understanding oneself, which is, the virtue ethics are broadly applicable, but they're not shared because you must do the same thing as me. It's just that the good life will look broadly similar. Right. Aristotle is both social but also individual in a way which really appeals, I think. Yeah,
definitely. And he also builds up from the individual to the city in a slightly different way from Plato, but similarly...
Because everyone's going to pull together. He's basically going to deny that it's possible that, let's go back to necrophilia, that there's not a flourishing, life, because, I suppose you might argue, because it lacks an emotional... I mean, it's a perversion, quite literally, but it's a failure to have a fully actualised relationship in which sex and the mind and modern day attitudes to relationship are that we should find someone who's emotionally satisfying, sexually, compatible, and an equal mind. And that all comes, in some senses, from Aristotle's conception of an ideal. Clearly, you could see that necrophilia is not an existence in which a human being is flourishing to their full potential. So you can...
It's not one of the bases of a very successful relationship, is it?
And because you can therefore draw certain universal inferences of what would not lead to a flourishing life, you can imagine a society of people living together. So that's how he builds to a political view. But it's not the same as saying there are rules. His rule is not... Don't sleep with dead bodies.
No.
His rule is lead lives in which all your aspects of your life are flourishing ones. And you might go, well, actually, I do flourish by exploiting people and fucking them all over, and I am the person. But that's all very good. But do you though?
Right, exactly.
That's the thing.
He makes a very good argument.
And us being Aristotelians requires constant vigilance, constant self-reflection. At the end of the day, to go, actually, have I been the best version of myself today that I could be?
Or have I been Gaddafi?
Yeah.
And by the way, it doesn't end very well for Gaddafi, does it? Let's face it. It becomes a cropper. But that's interesting as well, because Aristotle talks about the Solon's question of, do you call a man happy till he's dead? He kind of says, well, you can just be unlucky in life. He talks about King Priam from the Iliad, right? You can just have a really unfortunate...
He's having a great time until his son fucks things up.
Exactly. Basically, he says, unless you're unlucky... If you live well, according to the virtues, then this will lead to happiness. So goodness and happiness are not in tension; they are going together if you're doing it right. And that's
you should try and discern it's so important to stress. It's not rules. It's a general approach and principle to life. Yeah. Which, if you do, you will flourish.
Exactly.
You might earn more money by screwing someone over, but actually,
that's not what flourishing's about.
But that's not flourishing.
And crucially, you don't have to be a saint. You don't, if that's the wrong thing to be.
We see this with Plato. He's picking that idea.
You
want to going to an extreme one way is always wrong. That's his point about this golden mean. We mentioned it before. The good is in between two vices, not an opposite of it. Yeah. That is his great realisation, and I just genuinely believe that's true.
And there's lots of common sense in there about exactly what that means as well. And he talks about, being a legend. What does that consist of? You've got to be a good friend, and he talks in detail about friendship.
He writes a lot about it. Well, you say a whole book. Aristotle wrote a lot a lot more than we think Plato did.
He wrote dialogues as well. We just don't have them, unfortunately.
Well, we know that we've lost some of Plato. We know he burned some stuff, but we know that we have almost a tiny fraction of Aristotle.
Right.
But what we do have were not books written for publication, but essentially notes that people took.
It's lecture notes.
Lecture
basically.
notes.
Yeah.
Some of them possibly his own, some of them by people in
Right.
his school who took them. So we know what Aristotle thought and taught.
Yeah. They're amazing notes. But
On some subjects, but they're not. It doesn't have the
they're
same
not polished,
polished,
does it? Yeah.
easy reading.
Right.
Like maybe he went on to write dialogues based
Right.
on all of them, which were even better than Plato's, but we
yeah,
don't
we
have
know.
them. And
Yeah.
a funny story, which I always think is fascinating. We talked before about the possibility that we'll rediscover Aristotle's lost books because we know we're missing loads of them.
Ah, yes.
Our whole work for we were talking about the question about forms and the ideal world and whether there's an ideal form of love that human forms of love persist in, or whether it's the other way around. Those topics are known as metaphysical topics, and we get our word metaphysics from Aristotle.
Right.
Metaphysics is just Greek for after physics, because we have no idea what he titled that subject.
Interesting.
But we do know that in his collected lecture notes, it's in the volume after his work on physics.
Okay.
So it's physics,
Metaphysics.
and then
Right.
after physics.
And it's amazing, isn't it? Because he's basically trying to cover the whole of everything, and he's broken up into different books that now with different groups of notes about different topics, but they connect together. So he's does the physics, does the metaphysics. He's got biology stuff in there. He's got a collection of all the constitutions, all the cities that he's gathered up. He's got his ethics, is called the Nichomachean ethics, which is the one that really responds most directly to the Republic, I suppose.
Yeah, whether
And then the politics that come, and then they were, they're clearly supposed to be read. They clearly go together. Like the arguments kind of run.
By that point, he's sort of developing a thought. I mean, we have lecture notes. We don't know they're all written at the same time, or whether we can see a development in his thought. What's really important is you go, well, what's really difficult nowadays? You talk about philosophers. You might go, well, what does Descartes write about? He goes, well, he writes about like how we know things,
right?
Like epistemology, as it's called.
Yeah.
Or you might go what's Kant all about? Well, okay, he's about a few things, but we talk a lot about Kant in terms of ethics. When you talk about what Aristotle and even Plato, but particularly Aristotle, are about everything. Because they haven't yet broken that down. Now, Plato
wrote a whole book about hemorrhoids.
Plato does that a bit.
I haven't read it. We haven't put it forward as one of them. That really would be a wild card.
But Plato does it a bit, but Aristotle does it on everything. He's like, and you see a synthesis. I mean, there are common ideas. What Aristotle is most notable, because you talk a lot about writing books on physics and stuff, and natural history, and of course, I suppose what we call science now, which was understood as a branch of philosophy. He is the person who invents the scientific method. The idea that you draw conclusions based on observation. You might think, why is that not done? But if you're a Platonist, you're not interested in observation. You're interested in the ideal form and seeing how that revives. But if you believe actually there is no super ideal version of anything, there's only the individual instances of things. There's lots of different tables. We can infer general rules which apply to tables, but we have to start with the individual instances of tables and then use them as a basis to work out what a generalised table is, rather than the other way around. That appeals to modern people because that's how we do science.
As you say, it's a new science, and he has individual findings that come out of this. That are even until the in the mid 19th century.
Is this the sex octopus?
Lesbian octopuses now they have sex, and that was proved right by botanists or whatever. Not botanists. Octopologists?
Marine biologists? Marine biologists.
Aristotle was right about that. But,
he had made this observation, which was how octopuses procreated.
In Lesbos, by the way. This isn't lesbian. This isn't girl-on-girl action of octopuses. This is
which won't lead to procreation. Unless they're trans octopuses.
Maybe you can have. There are some species that do that.
I'm not much of an expert, but
anyway.
But the thing is that and everyone poo-pooed him and thought he was an idiot until it was observed. To be fair, he did make a couple of things.
Flies had 4 legs.
Yeah, that's
quite a basic error.
What's interesting, though, isn't it?
Presumably he observed one fly that happened to only have 4 legs.
What's interesting with Aristotle is that...
And then couldn't be bothered to look at any other flies. He's covering everything, so he doesn't have enough time, right?
He is a person whose whole principle is based on observation of things, but became to be considered such an expert, and this is not, by the way, in his lifetime,
Right.
but when we're talking 1400, 1500 years later, about the time of Aquinas in the Middle Ages,
People stopped observing stuff.
people stopped it because they thought, well, Aristotle
He's like
said it all.
the ideal, he's become almost a Platonic kind of
Yeah,
figure,
he's become the
but-
person that you just, if it
Right.
disagrees with Aristotle, it must be wrong, which is exactly the argument he had. I mean, and again, 1500 years later,
He becomes what
like,
people kick back against. the new
exactly, but
philosophy,
he
right?
is the person who's kicking back in the first place.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I hadn't thought of it in those terms. But is there a degree to which, because he's looking at all the individual sorts of tables rather than trying to reach towards the Platonic form of a table, that then drives him inevitably into basically a lot of list making. Like he's constantly doing there are 15 sorts of bottoms, and these are the 15 sorts, and then there are 20 types of toes, and
I think we come back. We've just said this, but I think we
it's
have
hard to
this.
read. So when you're looking at that sort of thing.
We have this idea of what
I love lists, but this man has a lot of lists.
We-
You've got to be prepared for some lists if you want. What do you think he was like when he did his shopping?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, Mrs. Aristotle was like, could you go and get some, I don't know, some apples, some pears? And well, let me stop you there. Right? There are 23 different sorts of apples.
What I think is interesting is why that throws us off a little bit when we read him is that we have this idea of what a philosopher does, the sort of questions that they're interested in. And Plato, even though he's interested in friendship, justice, truth, politics, they're all things that Plato is the sort of philosopher that we think philosophers are, and a bit of a political scientist,
Right.
essentially, and a bit of an ethicist.
Yep.
With Aristotle, he's all those things, and what we would clearly understand to be a biologist and other things as well. So, whilst Plato sort of seems to be a philosopher who hasn't specialised, Aristotle doesn't seem to understand. To us, it's quite difficult because when we read him, we think philosophers do this,
Yes,
and he does
He's doing
much
so
more
much else, yeah.
that you go, hold on,
Yeah.
I'm really an Aristotle philosopher. Why am I reading lists about the type of octopuses?
Right.
He's like, well, because I'm trying to catch all human knowledge and synthesise it into a way which is consistent and coherent. Why would the idea that it would be a barrier, the idea that you'd have a university which had separate faculties of knowledge would be insane.
Yeah, it was crazy. Well, and actually, one of the great advantages is that he just has a lot of common sense. He's so right about a lot of things that it overcomes this. Even if unlike me, you don't like lists. When he talks about the list of virtues or the types of friendship, or you just keep thinking every time you pick up Aristotle, you think, oh yeah, he's absolutely right about that. I'd never thought about that before like that, or I never noticed that, but now I've seen it, exactly as he describes, which makes it a lot easier to read what are just lecture notes. I mean,
and he suffers again. He is lecture notes. He suffers also from being essentially such an underpinning element of our thought, even today, even though we've now pushed back in the 19th century and done a little bit. But his approach, his methodology, his thoughts seeps into everything we think and know.
So it
sometimes
kind
we
of
read it seems a bit obvious, but actually it's only obvious because he systematised it. And everything that followed, I mean, I get your point, you're wrong, you owe me a quid about all footnotes being footnotes to Aristotle, because it's somewhat unfair to argue that Aristotle is footnotes to Plato. Like, it's always struck me that quotation is wrong, but I suppose what A.N. Whitehead is saying is that Aristotle is a response to Plato, and Plato is the first to do it, not argue that the world is made out of water.
Right, yeah, absolutely. There is a problem, though, for the reader, I think, which is it doesn't have the drama and the aesthetic element of the dialogues. As we said, he wrote dialogues, but they don't survive. But as books, they fail his own test, because one of the great bits of Aristotle is the Poetics, where he talks about what makes a great story, basically. And this is where we get the idea, you probably learnt it at school, primary school, the beginning, the middle, and the end, like a five-act structure.
Antagonist.
Yeah, and the
he
idea
invents
of
literary
characters.
criticism.
Yeah, literary criticism, characters driving plot. This is all Aristotelian analysis. He says that.
Well, it's amazing, given that we said in this podcast that essentially literature, as we understand it, I mean, I know we talk about how modern the Epic of Gilgamesh is and some of the early stuff, but generally, drama, theatre are invented
at this time.
About 100 years. Like Aristotle's getting towards the end of this great flourishing period.
But he's seen the big, the plays.
So he's gone to see these plays played once, and then he's carried out an analysis of what the ideal, how it all works,
and why they're good. And he talks about I think it's great. It's such common sense. He talks about how why do we enjoy watching or reading something that's a tragic thing? Well, it's because you identify with the main character who's driven to disaster because of their flaws in their character, but then you experience catharsis when they come a cropper because it's not you, basically, and it's a way of purging yourself of pity and fear and negative emotions, because you're seeing them played out in.
Everything going on in the world, everything he sees, all these new experiences, he then writes down why they work, how they work, and why they work. He's just fascinated with absolutely everything, and that is brilliant. I mean, some of his works stand out better than others. I think his literary criticism, his poetics and stuff, brilliant. The Nichomachean ethics, we've already said, is foundational for how you and I think about it. I mean, again, there's still occasional bits where you go, it's not entirely modern. Like he talks about, like, well, this attribute is a water attribute rather than a fire attribute, or something. And you're like, okay, well, let's just forget that, you know. But
you can. The whole system doesn't collapse under that because of the approach that he's done. Whereas, unfortunately, with Plato, you feel like, you know, he sets up the problem brilliantly, he has his great insights, but because he's building up, you don't
agree with his...
If he makes one error, the whole thing's fucked, and you end up, banishing the poets and,
Whereas you can be mostly Aristotelian about things. I'm sure I agree with Aristotle about a lot of things.
But not about lesbian and octopus sex.
In that case, he was right. But also, I mean, Aristotle's religious views, some of his political views, would be the ones that you can dissent from. It's not that you can pick and choose and follow the force of particular arguments.
Well, okay, so interesting question, right? We've done Plato versus Aristotle, but what about Aristotle versus Socrates, right? There's a generational gap, so he doesn't interact with him.
But do you think Aristotle would Aristotle have met Socrates?
No, I don't believe he would. No, I think he's probably too young.
Yeah.
But Socrates puts his money where his mouth is, and there's this sort of epic story of his life captured by Plato. He dies when they come for him. Basically, he sacrifices himself, drinks the hemlock. Same thing happens to Aristotle, right? This is that happens to a lot of people.
Yeah.
The bastards come for him. The state sort of puts him on. They're going to put him on trial, and he runs like the bloody hell away. Basically, he says, I'm out of here.
I'm sorry, I've obviously overstepped the line. I'll just disappear. Don't you worry about it. I'll fuck off.
It's a very common sense kind of.
He is.
Different personality.
He doesn't believe in fundamental ideals, in all ways. He's like, why would it? No, that's clearly an insane idea that you could die for your beliefs. You just go off,
Go off and look at some octopuses.
I mean, interestingly, where he goes off, and we've kind of alluded it to before, is quite an interesting story in itself, because he himself is a famous student. We've been looking about, if you imagine, in Star Wars, Vader teaches, whatever, they've got like a master and an apprentice.
But they don't have the fucking in the Star Wars thing. But isn't it amazing? Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Alexander the Great.
Well, hold on, we don't know what goes on. There's 10 years off screen to Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin's guy. He's got a lot of resentment. He's an angry young man.
Explain a lot, right?
But so in case you didn't catch that, listeners, we go from Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who all each one taught by the previous one. And then Aristotle does not teach one of the world's greatest philosophers. He is the personal tutor to Alexander the Great. See our previous episode.
Yeah. And seems to have it seems to have been an influence. Like, he encouraged him to invade Persia.
Can you imagine that? Was Alexander the Great, who obviously was quite a confidence himself, was he aware that Aristotle,
the heir of that,
that Aristotle was a great thinker, that he was a great, he probably didn't recognise Aristotle as great as he's come to be recognised. But did he go, well, actually, you're Plato's student, who was Socrates?
Right.
Were they aware of that?
I
don't think
don't
so.
know.
I think we later have come back to think of these people as the greats.
Right.
More than Alexander. But Alexander was a proper student. He's
an intelligent man.
And was presumably not being buggered because of the different... Well, hold on, Aristotle... Alexander was a prince, wasn't he?
His father was already giving, not receiving. Well, it's funny you should say this, because there is actually a sort of bizarre sexual anecdote about this. But just before I come to that, can I just say, I assumed, until I was doing the research for this podcast, that we could attribute to Aristotle some of Alexander's better qualities, like how thoughtful he is. He's an intellectual as well as a warrior, and he has this idea of merging Greek and Persian culture into a synthesis that can survive.
Because Alexander himself, whilst he is Greek, is from Macedon. So we've not mentioned
semi-civilized. He's like a Scotsman, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously we recorded episode 6 earlier in the day, and we talked a lot about Greek history, and Macedon was not mentioned. Like, it is on the fringes of it. So they basically go, it's Macedon, really. Like, that's up north, isn't it? So basically, they were Greek adjacent. They are on the fringes of Greek civilization, but basically
they did weird shit that the Greeks weren't quite sure about. Like, so they drank their wine, they were big drinkers, but they didn't water it down. They used to bugger each other senseless but grown-ups, like man to man, none of this sort of boy stuff. They went straight for it.
And the reason I say that is because I think that informs Alexander's view of a global empire.
Right.
He's not as provincial
It's
because
easier
he's not one of the in
step.
crowd. The Macedonians don't feel that they're part of Greek.
Interesting.
The Greeks are almost a bit snobby about it.
Yes.
So they have a more global aspiration, including conquering the rest of Greece.
Well, it's interesting, and Alexander famously says, he even says, like, oh, what are the things I do to impress the Athenians, basically. And I wonder if he's thinking about Aristotle as, his old teacher. But I assume that Aristotle was responsible for some of his more humane policies, we say. Apparently not. Apparently Aristotle was outraged that Alexander had this kind of, approach of a cultural synthesis. And he was like, no, you should be fucking the Persians up. What are you doing, Billy?
Well, I suppose he was Athenian.
Detention.
Fundamentally.
Yeah, right.
The
There you go.
Athenians, they're not... But neither the Athenians or the Spartans are necessarily like unalloyed heroes.
Democracy's great, but we're not sure about these foreign.
They're not
factors,
proto-Englishmen, I think.
Not proto-Englishmen.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? Anyway,
Although we read into it,
it's very hard not
but
to.
Then you, as we saw the Anabaptists, they go, oh yeah, and people would like throw themselves off a cliff rather than be captured by us because we're bastards. It's
You're
like,
absolute
and you go,
bastards.
oh, okay, no, I'm trying to see us as you as a heroic,
exactly.
people, but actually, you're occasionally. I mean,
We saw these flashes of, this is not like us.
our culture comes from them, so it's very easy to read it. And actually, I mean, I think we've discussed it earlier in the series, but Tom Holland, in his excellent book Dominion, where he says, I always started reading on the assumption that, we, in the West, were the child of Greece and Rome, but they were our culture and civilization. And then there'd been a sort of awkward interruption when the Christians came along.
That's basically, I still think that.
But
to be fair, he's coming from a Christian perspective.
No, he's
Holland,
not.
he's a Christian. That's the whole point. Yes, he
He
is.
explicitly says
He
that he's an
explicitly
atheist.
is. No, absolutely. Look it up.
Right, I'm looking
Put
at
a pound on it. I want that pound back.
Right.
Double or quits.
But his whole point is that because he's not a Christian, that he said, actually, I've come to see that isn't the case, and that we tend to elide over the things of Greek and Roman civilization which are foreign to us, and sort of see it,
Well, they don't yet have the Judeo-Christian, that aspect of the moral thinking hasn't yet entered their culture.
And basically, I mean, Holland's view is that nearly all of our ethics that we live today were actually, far more come from Paul than from any of these people.
Because he's Christian. Yeah. I'm going to go, this is great. There is a pregnant pause as I'm about to win my money back.
You carry on talking while I
but you mentioned the sexual anecdote, right? So apparently this is not true, but it's a story that people believe for hundreds of years. Basically, Alexander's mistress, or in some versions it's his dad's mistress, Aristotle fancies the pants off her in a surprising heterosexual move, which is not the last thing we expected, in spite of all of his teachings about how you control your lusts and all this sort of stuff and be sensible. He totally falls for her, and she basically persuades him, with Alexander secretly looking on from a window or from a cupboard or something, and she persuades Aristotle to let her ride him around the room in a kind of dominatrix and dominated kind of thing, and Aristotle's basically caught in this kind of humiliating being ridden by a woman, sort of as a dirty old bastard, basically. And Alexander basically has a good old laugh at it. There you go.
I mean, it's different from what was going on back in Athens.
And there's some interesting medieval woodcuts of this. They all take shortcuts.
Okay, just on the subject of it. Although his father was an atheist, Holland was raised in the Christian church by his devout Anglican mother, and he said in 2013 that because of her example, quote, I have always associated Anglicanism with goodness and decency and generosity of spirit and compassion, so I never had that visceral association of Christianity or institutional religion with repression or dogma or liberalism. Nonetheless, as an adult, he disavowed belief in the existence of God, saying, I have seen no evidence that would satisfy me that anything supernatural exists. I have seen no proof for God. In 2016, he wrote an article saying why I was wrong about Christianity for the New Statesman, in which he said that he had come to realise he was incorrect to have thought that in the past that his own Western values derived from Greece or Rome of antiquity and owed nothing to Christianity. So he is not a Christian. He was raised as a Christian, denied it, and then the whole point was the one I just made, which is that he does things for him. So I think you owe me £2. The man's an agnostic at best. He's not a Christian. He just argues that we're wrong in... Basically, people like you smugly think, oh yeah, uninterrupted. Unfortunately, there was this temporary hiatus of a couple of thousand years where, I've read Edward Gibbon, so I think that essentially Christianity is an unmitigated failure. No, we've learned nothing. We just go back and pick up where we left off. But where we left off, there's dirty old men being written around the room, pederasty. And it's like, I'm not suggesting that the history of Christianity is not unalloyed good because it clearly isn't. I'm just suggesting this isn't even a statement of faith. It's just a statement that when we see these flashes of the other in Greece and Rome, then we need to be careful that we don't just assume that they're just thoroughly good chaps and that they're just essentially Brits in togas going around,
Jonathan Miller.
However, Plato is utterly readable, and pederasty rarely comes up in the texts.
So I do feel slightly humbled by the fact that I just lost £2, but I would maintain my position that there is something that, the Christians have a lot to answer for, and basically we should go back to being these lovely Greek virtue, I think, with a few tweaks, admittedly, sexual politics.
I think the sexual politics are one of the tweaks introduced by Christianity.
Well, yeah, that's probably true, isn't it?
Monogamous love, for example.
When we
not platonic love, not proper platonic love involving boys.
Since every sort of knowledge and decision pursues some good, what is the good that we say political science seeks? What, in other words, is the highest of all the goods achievable in action? As far as its name goes, most people virtually agree, for both the many and the cultivated call it happiness.
I mean, this actually is a brilliant segue to our final thinker, unless you have anything else to say about Aristotle, because something really weird happens here, which is a Roman philosopher comes along who's interested in girls.
Yeah, I mean, it almost doesn't fit the other thing.
I don't know what to make of it.
And it's fair to say that there haven't been many Rome. Like when we think about the greats, when they say the Greeks thought a lot and the Romans fought a lot, but the Roman thinkers. I mean, we've looked at people like Cicero and
he did a Republic, by the way.
Yeah,
it doesn't quite make the cut, but it's it's interesting.
But in terms of the top ends, they're not up there with the Greeks in terms of the impact they have. However, our Wildcard is bloody interesting.
It is interesting. Have you come across it before? I mean, so we're introducing an Epicurean Wildcard. You always need an Epicurean.
I had come across it. I think I might have even quoted it in certain things, but it's a secondary text. Right. So I knew the work, I knew the author, but I'd never read the actual text. Not in a sort of cheating. I wasn't cheating. I'd be like, as is stated in this, and I'd read that in a secondary text. So, but you know how it is at university. You can't read every secondary text you allude to in an argument.
But also, it doesn't have the. Lots of people. No one makes socks with our third author, Lucretius, right? It's not a household name in Plato and Aristotle.
Maybe there are Lucretius socks.
I'm not going to bet any more of my hard-earned money, but I think that if there aren't, there should be, because this guy is terrific. But I hadn't heard of him, and I picked this book, and I was like, this looks interesting. I took it on holiday with me on my gap year. Okay, I went to Australia, and I turned up. You know when you're just incredibly jet-lagged, and tiredness is like a drug, isn't it? Right? But I was also pissed out of my mind because.
You've been flying for 14 hours,
knocking back the martinis actually, and
gin or
vodka. Well, I'm usually a gin man.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what I get, to be honest.
As a plate, you can't tell the difference
exactly.
anyway.
And I was staggering around, hadn't slept for 30 hours or whatever, pissed out. I was staggering around Melbourne with a map of Sydney. Yeah. And they have a lot of the same street names. Fucking hell, I was
Dingo
confused.
Street.
I was so confused.
Wallaby Avenue.
I was like, but I literally, I know I'm tired and I know I'm drunk, but that is not what this map is saying. And it turned eventually I was like, I've got a map of the wrong city. But I also had in my other hand copy of Lucretius, and I remember sitting. I think I was sitting in Sydney Botanical Gardens, except I was in Melbourne. Right, I still don't fucking know. Reading this, I was like, "What the fuck is this? This is brilliant. Yeah. What is this?
So
I just couldn't get my head around.
This is a work of philosophy, which is really a work of science in many ways. Yeah. I suppose an explanation of evolution.
Yes.
Atomic theory.
Yeah.
But here's the twist. It's written in the style of an epic poem.
Okay. Because of course you would, right?
So this is a science textbook, and literally the theory of evolution. Admittedly not Darwin's theory of evolution.
Yeah, it doesn't have natural selection, but he's got evolution.
He's got evolution, because it's widely been believed in. The theory of atoms, some pretty cutting edge.
Amazing. He's even got this swerve thing. It's amazing. It's almost like he's reaching towards kind of quantum stuff.
So there's a book called The Swerve. Did you know this? Which was published. So it won like a Pulitzer in 2015. It's relatively recent. Okay. And it's by I think Philip Greenblatt.
I think it's Greenblatt.
He wrote a book called The Swerve, in which he argues essentially that the rediscovery of the final and only existing text of Lucretius on the nature of things, which is
down to one copy,
which was found in a monastery which was
Right.
rotten and then was copied, that
So close.
introduced all of the ideas that essentially led to the Renaissance.
Oh, really?
Now,
So it wasn't rediscovering Plato, it was rediscovering Lucretius, he says.
Now, obviously, many people have argued that this is a massive oversimplification and forms as this detective, like it was a sort of
Right.
it was a book which was sort of available in W.H. Smith at the airport. So
Yeah,
that, obviously it argues, just for a simplistic,
Yes,
this is the
yeah,
one thing.
right,
And,
as you do.
but he takes the term, he turns up the swerve. That's when modern civilization began.
Oh, nice,
Now,
I see, okay. yeah.
Even though you might argue that is probably an oversimplification,
Sure.
it is apparently a riveting read. I've put it on my list of what to
Right.
read, which basically argues, and he tracks where the manuscript went and how the copies are made,
man.
and then from that propagated all of the things that make modern history. Now, if the author is even partially right, Lucretius is one of the most important books in history.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And totally underrated as a result in today's,
Yeah, so what does Lucretius mean by the swerve?
So, he basically, there's this wonderful bit where he's talking, as you say, it's a poetic form, and he's looking at like dust motes in sunlight, and then it gives him an idea, and that leads him on to talking about atoms, and he's even got the idea of like
random movement.
and then random movement
probability.
of it. Yeah, and which
In
stops
poem.
you in a poem. And then it basically says that we're not in a deterministic universe.
Yeah.
This is great, but we're also crucially not in a universe where the gods, if they even exist, and he really doesn't seem to. I mean,
Yeah.
he doesn't like his religion.
No.
And I would put my money on him not being,
He wasn't a Christian, I think. we can
definitely
say
wasn't a
that,
Christian.
yeah.
And he.
I think he lived before Christ.
It's about first century BC. So
He's a contemporary of Julius Caesar.
yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, you get these hints of it because the book is kind of like dedicated to Venus.
So who of course is
Aeneas'
Caesar.
mum, right?
Yeah,
She's got it going on.
Caesar's
And
ancestor.
Caesar's ancestor.
So he's living in that time, as in about 300 years after
Aristotle, and he's very he influences all of the poets that we talked about, Horace and Ovid, and Cicero really likes him. So all the big guns. Are kind
We've
of
almost completely forgotten him.
yeah.
But
We don't study
not-
this guy at school, and we should.
I mean, I think partly it's just because of the nature of how it's written. If he'd written
Right.
dialogues or whatever, but the idea
Right.
of reading a poem,
Right.
guys and girls out there, just pick it up and read it. Like
Yeah.
I admit I didn't read it from the beginning to
Right.
the end. I just would dip in.
And you don't have to because he's got quite a good structure that you can follow through.
Yeah.
I'll go to this bit, and
Yeah. And you just go, actually, that's a really well-structured poem which does explain how the universe works. But
even by today's standards,
yeah,
it's
even modern day
amazing.
standards. But just this idea that rediscovery of that book, a single manuscript,
Oh, yeah.
when you think about how much we've lost,
Yeah.
these great books to survive, and that I think makes this a dangerous wild
It's going to
card.
be hard to lose it after it's survived one big purge, and then we've now got lots of copies, and we're really going to consign all to the.
Yeah, and I suppose whether we consider that this is one of the most important books depends whether we do accept the argument in this more recent book that it is the origin. I mean, I haven't read that,
yeah,
so
sure.
I'm not yet
But hang
sure.
on, but does it? I mean, isn't it not just incredibly moving in itself that you get this work, and it's it's a bit like I don't know, A Brief History of Time, or Richard Dawkins as well is in there because it's everything. It's biology, it's the development of human societies. It's
the Fermi paradox.
yeah, right.
Like,
He's got the face talking about aliens.
Yeah.
He says, "Let's talk about some. What about other planets?
dare
There'll be
to
other planets."
ask about the nature of worlds beyond our own, and basically, like I said, it's
incredible.
completely improbable. It's like an early version of the Drake equation.
Yeah.
So I was like,
How
what?
is this is
Like,
a fucking Roman book. He's talking about aliens.
if there's ever a case where you're thinking that
Was there time travel and some guys?
aliens from like
Right.
a higher vibrationary level, like kind of shit you hear, and you
Yeah.
contacted a person and made them a prophet. This is the guy.
This is the one. This is like
the
he's
one.
Doctor Who trapped in the Roman period, and he's desperately trying to
Communicate with the future. Like, hey guys, I know stuff I shouldn't. It's mad.
It's absolute mad shit. And he talks about basically bacteria as well. So he ends bizarrely with the plague of Athens, which you always come across with Thucydides. But he's talking about they're probably little tiny things that make us ill that are kind of floating around in the air.
Yeah.
What?
A nice link back to the Plato
Yeah.
of Athens. Yeah.
Although it's a very odd place to end, and it does feel like they think it probably is unfinished because it's a very strange thing. Because the thing that I find so moving about it is he talks about all this stuff, and then it feels like it's all building up to this point where he just suddenly says, "Don't fear death."
Yeah.
You'd be crazy to fear death. Don't worry about the gods. Don't worry about being dead. This is how you should lead your life, basically. Death is nothing to us, he says. Cultivate pleasures, simple pleasures, friendships, be happy.
Yeah.
And it's great, but it's all done in this, like as you say, like if Richard Dawkins and Stephen Hawking decided to write a poem, but it's It's better than that, actually. It's,
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely terrific. There are some odd bits.
Yeah.
I don't
Sexual
know if
deviancy.
the sexual deviancy. So you suddenly, all this stuff about, science, and you're reading it very sort of serious, not difficult read, but serious.
It's not boring.
It's not boring,
but it is.
but it's,
It's like
there's no sense of humour in
Yeah.
it or anything. And then you're suddenly reading this bit that's all about deviant sex. He's saying, oh yeah, doggy style, of course, as everybody knows. If you want to conceive, go for it doggy style. Do it like they do on the Discovery Channel, basically. That's the way to do it. What you shouldn't do, which a lot of prostitutes do, he says, is, basically when they clench their buttocks in a certain way to withdraw a little bit from your member, that is not going to be what you want. Doggy style, I just want to say that again, doggy style is the way to go. And then this bizarre, it goes on for pages, and sort of, and you keep thinking, look, I never thought I'd say this, but I'm like, Lucretius, can we get back to the atomic theory? I don't want to hear about it.
I suppose he views it as all part of this idea of all knowledge being part of a single bundle. There's this lack of specialisation.
Yes, for him it probably wasn't a sort of, he's gone off on one here.
I was talking about the nature of life,
and seeds, and small things.
And now I'm talking about prostitutes' buttocks. So it just flows.
Totally, yeah. But he also, there is a little bit
and it's put in poetic form.
And it's poetic and it's well written. But is there a little bit of a flash of his personality that comes through? And we're not the first people who've talked about this, where there's quite a lot where he basically says, like, don't be a desperate, dirty old bastard who is wildly in love with someone and basically you're not getting any satisfaction from them. And he definitely, you don't have to read much between the lines to think, oh, I think he's been a jilted lover.
Yeah,
shall we
I
say.
think it was something like in the Roman period, wasn't it? Because they were all sleeping with each other. Yeah. So we've already seen quite a lot in some of the previous podcasts. That,
Catullus has probably run off with his girl, basically.
Yeah, and
or Julius Caesar or something.
Yeah, and there's so many poets who've just written, they go, you bitch, you bastard, I fucking hate you. So,
but it's just weird. Like, so he says,
this is why the Greeks didn't get involved with women.
Yeah, stick to the boys. This wouldn't have happened.
In a Platonic ideal, you don't have to deal with any of this messiness. You just dominate people who legally belong to you or under your duty of care.
Exactly.
So they can't fight back. It just makes it so simple.
And then persuade them of your ethical system, which justifies the whole thing. What could possibly go wrong? But I just love the bit where he's like, he's describing what it's like to be horny as hell, right? Okay.
In hexameter.
In hexameter, yeah. And he's just like, you just can't get any satisfaction. Doesn't matter how much of the fucking you do, you just can't get your rocks off. And he's like, you get to the point where you're going around to your girlfriend's house and you're covering her doorpost with marjoram, right? It's like, obviously you do that. We've all done it.
You not smell the marjoram as you came.
Yeah, he's like, guys, can't you realise she's probably got terrible breath? She probably stinks. And you could fuck her every which way, even doggy style. It's not going to satisfy you if you don't have the right relationship. Basically, you need the love of a good woman. Where there's a bit of mutuality.
Elements of Aristotelian virtue. Yeah.
It does sound like he's talking from experience, and I just wondered if you'd ever had that problem, obviously before your operation.
Everything I know about love, I learned from Lucretius.
But it's interesting this tradition that is a very ancient one. You get it in Chaucer, actually. This idea that this story that Lucretius dies from taking an overdose of ancient Viagra.
So if Chaucer mentions him, then we know that they knew who he was. So
Chaucer doesn't mention him. Chaucer mentions his missus,
right? Who's
Lucilia, and Chaucer's wife of Bath calls her Lucy. But it's the same. It's a memory of the same tradition, which is that he died because his missus was just... He obviously had some kind of problem, right? His missus has given him an aphrodisiac and has just dosed him. Maybe Viagra. This is why he can't get any...
He's overdosed on Viagra. He was always horny. Basically, the spirit was willing, but the flesh was weak.
And he just couldn't...
He overdosed on Viagra and killed him.
I mean, what a way to go. It's
would you rather do that or hemlock?
That's a very... Right in. Okay, so today's poll. It's the Viagra or hemlock.
Like Lucretius or Socrates?
Drinking yourself to death or... Yeah. It's a very good question.
Death, then, is nothing to us, nor does it concern us a whit, inasmuch as the nature of the mind is but a mortal possession.
So,
where does this leave us? Who are we going to rescue from the flames?
Okay, I don't believe we can genuinely consider, even for a second, we're not going to save either Plato or Aristotle.
Totally.
Okay.
Well, okay.
Okay, so what I want to propose to, taking as read that we're saving both.
Yep.
Which do you prefer? If you had to make a choice of one, so we have done for our...
This was my sock choice this morning.
For our it's interesting who you made your choice of, because you've given one pair of socks to me and you kept the other one. Given let's say that obviously for the purpose of the podcast,
Yep.
we know that they're going through.
They've got it.
But in just a sub-level podcast game, we can only save one.
Yeah.
That's not the case. I'm not going to make you do that. I will refuse to do that. But
Okay,
if you just have
that's
to
good.
go.
Who goes on top, basically, Plato or Aristotle?
Yeah.
Well, okay, first of all, just to provide the parameters here, are we saying, because I think we can cheat here because they're not writing books in the wrong sense of the word, so I think we're packaging these up, right? So we get it, let's say with Plato...
Complete works of Plato versus
complete works, Aristotle, complete works.
And obviously there's a lot more of Aristotle.
There's more of Aristotle. Well, okay, I'm going to use the cheat that we used with Caesar, which is to say we are going to assume that Aristotle's knowledge has percolated into culture, as it did, right, and set the whole, and so do we
We're not
actually
undoing
need the
time.
words?
Yeah.
Or do we need the words to have the ideas? Whereas with Plato, the words themselves are so glorious, I cannot bear to consume
Yeah, I'm with agreement with you. Plato is on top, as it was.
As it happened in the grove.
I think that's right.
Also, got a drinker.
Aristotle's thought,
Maybe
I wouldn't
we
say
have
is.
to
I wouldn't say is better. I mean, we could. Our civilization would not exist if we wiped anything out of the timeline. We'd cease to exist.
Right.
But Aristotle's thought is far more important than his writing.
Yes.
So, although the history of that writing and how it passes that thought is
Right.
obviously bound up together. If we're talking about it from a series of books, of literary things, Plato's got the edge.
Clearly, yeah.
In terms of thought, in terms of how we universe, if we had to wipe one out from the timeline and assume that the other one continued to exist,
Yes.
you'd have to wipe out Plato and keep Aristotle.
I think that's right.
Because I think our world would be least changed
Yes.
by the continuous existence of Aristotle.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be totally unrecognisable.
And it's just, you can't, basically, these are so foundational.
Yeah.
Everyone should read them. And it's a good read.
I mean, I think there is too much. I mean, Plato, you could literally read all Plato's written. I'd start off with the small ones and work up.
I've read most of them now, actually.
Aristotle, I'd be a bit pickier.
I might not read the hemorrhoids one.
Poetics, Nichomachean ethics.
I wonder why he had
Politics.
the hemorrhoids. I've just thought of that. That was Plato's fault, man.
I think those are the big three, though. I think
Yeah.
if I was going to read three Aristotelian works,
Yeah.
Nichomachean ethics,
Yeah.
the politics, and the poetics.
Yes, I agree with that. Well, it's worth just saying something about the poetics, which is we have actually already lost half of it.
Yeah.
And we've lost a bit on the comedy, right? And,
Well, that's actually part of the plot of In the Name of the Rose.
it's not really a shortcut to the thought, but it's worth a mention, isn't it?
The Name of the Rose is
It's cracking.
absolutely cracking, and is actually set in this time where Aristotle is being rediscovered and copied and re-entering Western civilization. And the tension that causes. It's a cracking novel. It was made into an all-right film.
Christian Slater
and Sean Connery.
I watched that film with my parents when I was
with
12.
a little sex scene.
Yeah, and they fast forwarded the sex scene. Like Dad stood in. I think Mum stood in front of the thing. So obviously, I went
got
back.
an 18 rating for that reason.
I think there's a bit of cunnilingus as well. Slightly unconvincing because they've all got plague and they haven't had a wash or anything. But obviously, I went back, crept back downstairs late at night to watch that scene. Right? Bloody hell! It was. My parents had got the thing from Blockbuster, and so many people had done what I had done that it was scratched and you couldn't see anything.
Well, I don't think it was particularly.
I don't think it was.
But it was
There's a
recently,
TV version.
the TV version, which was made about 4 years ago now, which was a sort of a European co-production. That's cracking. A 10-part. I think it's like a 10-part series. That's really good.
And it's got a.
It's far more true than the book.
the
I mean, to be
book,
fair, Umberto Eco himself said that his the film was a palimpsest of the novel. A palimpsest being a text which is written over a scratched off earlier version of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it actually dramatises that moment that of survival of the last copy that we've talked about with Lucretius, haven't we? It's like instead of some Renaissance legend turning up and saying, "Oh God, look at what you've got there! Please, can I have a copy of that?" And he took a copy before it crumbled to dust. What happens if something worse happens and then you lose it? And that's one of the influences for this whole series, actually.
So it's definitely not a shortcut, but it's an adjacent thing.
adjacent,
It's also a cracking novel or TV series, which touch on some of the stuff that we've talked about. I mean, probably more we're going to talk about in subsequent seasons when we rediscover all the stuff.
Right.
When we get to Aquinas. But there aren't many dramatisations of Plato and Aristotle. Again, Plato should be filmed. It should be performed.
It should be, but there aren't.
Aristotle, you couldn't read anything about it. It's harder to read, but it's so worthwhile. But I think this is shocking. I reckon you can get away with reading a good book about Aristotle.
Whereas I don't think you can do that with the Plato.
No.
With the Plato, for God's sake, any book about Plato will be much more complicated and boring than just reading the Plato.
If you want to be educated and well-read, which if you've got to
read
do 10 seasons, you've got to... Well, I
all
just...
of it. And the
I read Symposium. I'd read Euthyphro. They're really punchy. They're really
quite short.
Yeah, and then build up to the longer ones. But none of them are very long.
Yeah.
But with Aristotle, you could read a solid book about Aristotle. We'll make some recommendations. And then if you want to
Beginner's
actually...
guide.
And the ones which have large sections of text, you'd be fine. Yeah. So they're definitely going in.
Definitely. What about Lucretius?
We need to do... I think we're probably at about 17 or 18 books out of 10.
We're over 20 now.
Over 20, okay. Are we giving Lucretius another space? That is a lot of books we need to... lot of things we need to decide. I mean, we can, of course, have something at the end where we delete books.
We can. I mean, interesting. I was not expecting to keep the Lucretius. I thought this was a genuine wildcard just for interest, but you've made such a powerful case. And also the fact that it was already lost. You know, we got to the last copy. Can we really put it in the... I don't know.
I think the problem about Lucretius is...
It's unfinished.
I don't know. I haven't read this book, The Swirl, about it.
How persuasive is it?
So I'd only come across that argument essentially last night.
Right.
If that is true, it is one of the most significant books for human history. However, no one knows that. Only people who bought this best-selling American. It's quite a well-known book, around it as well. But the point is, it isn't part of normal thought at all. I don't think... I mean, I came across references to it. It comes up a lot in my studies, but it wasn't one... No one is a massive fan of it. I don't know anyone who's a specialist in Lucretius. So, would the world keep on going without it? If it wouldn't, if deleting that would change history so much, it's one of those unknown things which is a pivotal event, but we don't really appreciate it. And it's fun. I think, clearly, if we could only pick 2 out of the 3, Lucretius doesn't make the cut.
Clearly. And also, could we do with if most of it had been lost or eaten by a mad monk or whatever, and you only had bits of it, because it's fragmentary anyway, is that such a terrible loss? Or we had the quotes quoted by someone else. Do you actually need the whole book as it survives?
The other things, the argument that is talking about probabilistic theory and stuff like that, it's like it's prophetic. Yeah, but no one, when they rediscovered it in the Renaissance, thought about it. It didn't spur probabilistic theory at that point.
Right.
I think it's possible that people are reading into Lucretius things which are good guesses, but like atomic theory, as the ancients believed in it, is not the same as Dalton's atomic theory.
Well, also doggy style. I mean, I think there's an argument that the West would have reinvented doggy style and its importance, its fundamental importance, without Lucretius.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I think it was a natural development of society at that point. So, I think Lucretius is great fun. It is a wild card, but I think for our sanity, it doesn't make the cut.
Okay, all right. It's a deal.
That's a deal. Okay, so you owe me £2. We have ended our survey of the of Babylonian, essentially up to the end of the classical period.
Yep.
A little bit before, a couple was actually picked into the last couple of thousand years. But we've hit 1 AD pretty much. I mean, occasionally we've gone over that a little bit, but essentially we've now reached the common era, as you'd call it.
So although we're only 10% of the way through the list, we're actually 3/5 of the way through the time. Yeah, that's why we've got stuff to... We need to look back over this series before we look forward, I think, and draw out some conclusions. But it's been great, and we've made it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've done some great thinking and some great drinking. So cheers.
Cheers to the future.
Excellent. Oh, fuck. Can we just, before we start, just check that spider has gone? Can you see it from where you're sitting?
Spider has gone. This dead spider.
Gone where, though?
It's flipped down, it's fine. It's not coming inside here, it's too
Plotting
hot.
its revenge. It is staggeringly too hot.